This is Newsfile, your most authoritative news analysis platform. You can't afford to miss our very special edition, our quarterly Joy Change Speakers Series 4. I'm Samson Lardy Anyenini. We'll be right back to deal with a most vexed matter.
It has been said that, quote, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others, unquote. We in Ghana should know, for we have tried virtually all the others. Free and fair. We've had constitutional regimes without limitations placed on executive power. We've had rule by law without rule of law. And we have lived under a number of military dictatorships. Just as we demonstrated in the drive towards independence in the 1940s and 1950s, we showed again in the 1990s, after the initial decades of turbulence in our national life, our determination to live in conditions of freedom and democracy. So it was that on 28th April 1992, some 31 years ago, we approved by an overwhelming margin in a referendum of that day, with 3,408,100 persons representing 92.59% in favor, with 272,855 persons against, i.e. a mere 7.41%. The adoption of the provisions of the Constitution of the Fourth Republic, which set up the institutions of a liberal democratic state, operating on the basis of the separation of powers with express guarantees of fundamental human rights. It was thus promulgated with immense popular backing. Tomorrow, Saturday, 7th January 2023, will be exactly 30 years since the Constitution of the Fourth Republic came into force, with the inauguration into office of the first president of the Fourth Republic, His Excellency, the late Jerry John Rawlings. It has inspired the longest period of stable constitutional governance in our history, with the consensus emerging strongly that the democratic form of governance is preferable and the benefits are showing. Hence the decision to celebrate 7th January as Constitution Day. Our country is considered a beacon of democracy and stability in Africa, where respect for the principles of democratic accountability, human rights, and the rule of law have enabled us to oversee 8 presidential elections in the Fourth Republic, with 5 presidential transitions and 3 peaceful transfers of power through the ballot box from one party to another. We have every right to be proud of this record, and the celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Fourth Republic should inspire us even further to hold on to this status. Fellow Ghanaians, I acknowledge that the strength of any democracy is very much determined by the credibility of its electoral process and respect for the will of the people. We cannot overlook the fact that instability has followed disputed elections in many parts of the African continent. That is why we in Ghana must continue to urge the Electoral Commission to work to ensure that all stakeholders in the electoral process, that is the citizenry, civil society, political parties, do not have lingering questions about the legitimacy of an election. On the 2 occasions in which disputes have arisen over the results of presidential elections, happily, it was in the court and not on the streets that the issues were satisfactorily resolved. By all accounts, We've come a long way, and we should not take it for granted that everybody in Ghana has accepted democracy as the preferred mode of governance. There are those who would rather have authoritarian rule because they claim our country is underdeveloped and democracy is cumbersome, and we need to get things done in a hurry. We still have some work to do to convince such people that we are all safer under democracies. Nevertheless, if we seek to prolong our democratic journey, it is imperative that we enhance transparency and accountability in our governance structures and build strong institutions that can fight corruption and the dissipation of public funds.
Welcome to our special, very special quarterly edition of Newsfile, Joy Change Speakers Series 4. Our 6 distinguished guests, Honorable Inusah Fuseini, Bridgette Dzogbenuku, Professor Baffour Oliver Barker-Vormawor, Ace Anan Ankomah, and Kathleen Addy. Will spend 15 to 20 minutes each making a case for review of the Constitution or otherwise. And then they will take questions from you. We will ask some of the questions. And when I say we, I mean myself and my co-host, Maame Mensa-Bonsu. She holds a BA in Theatre Arts and Spanish and an LLB, both with first-class honors from the University of Ghana. She completed the Bachelor of Civil Law with distinction at the University of Oxford, UK in 2014 until 2017 when she began her DPhil. Also at the University of Oxford, Maame was a program coordinator for the Law Department and lecturer in Constitutional and Criminal Law at Lancaster University's Ghana campus in Accra. She also worked as a technical advisor to an arbitration tribunal at the Ghana Arbitration Center. Maame is called to the bar in Ghana. Her current research focuses on the constitutional tensions between post-colonial nation states and the tribal legal orders within their borders. She has written on judicial review, discretionary powers, executive authority, natural justice, and separation of powers. Just very recently, she delivered a paper on the topic, Should We Still Trust in the Judges? And she took a look at cases delivered by the Supreme Court bordering on the Constitution since 2012. We are very privileged and thrilled to have you, Maame, join us to do this for Mother Ghana. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. It is an honor, really.
Yes, please, let's hear you. Please go on. Yeah. So we will begin by noting that we acknowledge that the Constitution Review Commission has done some work that was set up in 2010 and presented a report in 2012. As we know, they did consultations in 170 districts of the country. They met with judges, they sat in people's homes and various interest group meetings and met organized labor. They met with ex-presidents. They met with a vice president. They met with retired judges and sitting judges as well. They met with ex-speakers of parliament and speakers of parliament. They met with party leaders and various others. They held regional and national consultations, and they sought views from our kith and kin abroad. They produced for us a historic document. They had over 57 sessions. They had over 89,000 submissions, including through SMS and varied media platforms. And they sought to give us proposals towards transforming a political constitution to a developmental constitution. The president received this document on the 20th of December 2011. The report contains the will, dreams, hopes, and aspirations of the people for what should be their new Ghana. Professor Mills, late, inaugurated the Constitution Review Commission. But truth is, this wasn't his idea. He takes the credit for showing he had a listening ear and decided to take care of a major concern earlier expressed variously by many. The CRC acknowledges this when it says its establishment, quote, was an outcome of many fervent calls by Ghanaians to fine-tune the constitution in order to advance the key democratic gains made since the return to constitutional rule on the 7th of January 1993. But perhaps the African Peer Review Mechanism, APRM, might be rightly credited with being the body that was first to present a formal document in 2005 outlining the many shortfalls in the Constitution needing change. Of course, the concerns were obvious. In fact, Parliament had a hand. President John Kufuor committed himself to the process in an AU meeting in Khartoum in 2007. Today, the MP for Swami, Majority Leader and Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, Oseiche Mensa-Bonsu, is leading a committee from diverse backgrounds to revisit the subject of review using the CRC report as a source document. On July 12, 2022, at a public lecture at KNUST, he delivered a paper on the theme, Constitutional Review, the Perspectives of a Legislator.
I think it is important, Samson, that we remember, President Akufo-Addo of Ghana said that it is important that we never forget that democracy is not a static achievement, but a promise that needs continuous nurturing.
Right.
And he's right. And so the question of whether our constitution needs to be reviewed or not is one that civil society has never ceased to push and prompt the political leadership about the need to complete that process. And recently, the debate has been very vigorously revived by the Fix the Ghana movement in 2020, when it started a campaign for a new constitution. People, including the president, began again talking about the urgency for review, as surveys, including the Afrobarometer by CDD, revealed a significant distrust, reduction in the trust for democracy and its institutions within the country. There have also been, let's also not forget that we've had a wave of coups that have stemmed from some of the failings that we see in African democracy. So Christopher Nyenevi and Richard Fosu of Monash University in Melbourne have recorded in a recent publication that the pride and euphoria that greeted independence from colonial rule in the 1950s through the 1960s was short-lived and many African countries plunged into decades of political instability, socioeconomic stagnation, and crisis, and even civil wars. The causes they identified included a lack of democratic participation by the people, and peaceful transfer of power after elections, rebel movements, and the bloody coups. 80 successful ones, 108 failed coup attempts, and 139 coup plots in sub-Saharan Africa alone between 1956 and 2001. Last year, there was a wave of coups and failed coups, and it is predicted that these will continue. The general cry that citizens are not happy because the dividends of the democracy that they have invested so much faith in have not been delivered makes constitutional review for us imperative, because we are lucky to have now the oldest constitution in sub-Saharan Africa, and not just other than Botswana, and not just the oldest constitution, our oldest constitution, the longest configuration of government that we have had. So the majority leader, Osagyefo Mensa-Bonsu, seems to suggest a complete overhaul, a fresh constitution for a fresh start.
Right.
And we here today are going to discuss these possibilities.
Right. Thank you very much, Maame. So we will now listen to the majority leader who set the tone even a notch higher not too long ago in July 2022.
Indeed, any president appoints more than 5,000 officers into public office. We are still counting. Certainly, Professor Chairman, is a monarch that the Constitution has created. The rest of us citizens hold him in awe, and even when he strays, it is difficult to talk straight to him. This arrangement needs to be revisited. It cannot be good for our growth. It cannot be good for the growth of democracy. The country needs a head of state and government. Therefore, agreeably and understandably, at any given time, we shall have a president or prime minister. However, there is an empirical study conducted by the World Bank which suggests that small unitary countries are better served with prime ministers as heads of state other than presidents. A president has the whole country as his constituency, whereas a prime minister operates from his or her own small cell. When the parliamentary leader wins and his party wins majority of seats in parliament, he becomes the prime minister. His campaign purse is small as compared to the president's campaign wardrobe. Of late, electioneering campaign funds of contestants at every level of political arrangements has been escalating. The campaign funds of parliamentary candidates from primaries to national elections is averaging $600,000. $600,000. That is according to the research conducted by CDD in respect of the events culminating in the 2020 elections. $600,000. If we are converting it to cedis now, it will be 4.8 million Ghana cedis to elect a member of parliament into office. Now, if you elect such a person into office, he or she is not a Father Christmas. You make him a minister. What do you think will happen? And as a nation, we turn around, we say we want to combat corruption. How do you combat corruption when we do this to ourselves? Mr. Chairman, that amount is huge. We are yet to begin the counting of notes in the lead up to the 2024 elections. The campaign pairs of a presidential candidate from party primaries to the national elections by any proper reckoning and accounting cannot be less than the equivalent of 50 million United States dollars. How much does that translate to? 50 million. Over 400 million Where do the candidates have the monies from? There is a nexus between huge campaign expenditure and corruption through the award of contracts. What therefore should be our preference pursuant to good governance? As a nation, we must confront this. Do we need this expensive structure of government in the president, or a much lesser evil in the form of a prime minister who is, as well, much more accessible and accountable to the representatives of the people? We have a choice. In a strict presidential system, ministers are appointed from outside parliament. Invariably, they are all technical persons in various fields who, when they come to be appointed, are able to assist the president in the determination of policy of government and also for the efficient running of the state. These are experts, they are consultants, technical people, they are professionals who add value to government. That is what obtains in the United States of America, which is the flagship of presidential systems in the world. In the Westminster system, the Prime Minister appoints ministers for the same purpose in the determination of general policy of government as contained in our Constitution, Article 76(2), and also for the efficient running of the state, Article 78(2). The ministers in the Westminster system are not necessarily technocrats, but they are often long-serving members of parliament who must have served on committees for some time, risen to chair the committees, or perhaps served as shadow ministers and acquainted themselves with all matters pertaining to particular ministries or departments or agencies, such that they might have become authorities in matters concerning the various ministries, departments, and agencies. When such people are appointed as ministers, there is manifest value addition, unlike what obtains in our Fourth Republic, where because of the hybrid system of government that is being operated, the president is compelled to appoint a majority of ministers from parliament. And that is according to Article 78(1), which provides ministers of state, and I'm quoting, shall be appointed by the president with the prior approval of parliament from among members of parliament or persons qualified to be elected as members of parliament, except that the majority of ministers of state shall be appointed from among members of parliament. You are all witnesses to what obtains in such an arrangement. Many ministers, deputy ministers, when they get nominated and who appear before the appointment committee of parliament, when asked fundamental questions, rudimentary questions relating to their designated ministries, would often respond. And I'm quoting them. I don't know, please. You approve of me, and when you do approve of me, when I go there, I shall learn. What are you going to learn? When the Constitution provides that you shall assist the president in running the state efficiently, and the Constitution provides that you shall assist the president to evolve policies for your ministry. You are telling us at the appointment committee that we should approve of you. When you go there, you go and learn. So what value addition are they adding to your governance? Ladies and gentlemen, that's what you have. How are such persons, rudimental learners, going to assist the president in the determination of general policy of the ministries, the superintendent, or indeed of the government? How are they going to help in the efficient running of the state? There's one principal reason why, as a nation, we are marking time. We are stuck because many of our ministers do not add value to our governance. That's the truth. And I'm not here talking about the current MPP administration. I refer to all administrations since 1993. The time has come for us to seriously introspect on this. And hasn't the time come for us to place in the Constitution an upper ceiling on the number of ministers of state that we should have? As I've already stated, cabinet ministers assist the president in the evolution of policies. That is according to Article 76 of the Constitution. All bills and agreements that are presented to Parliament are underpinned by governmental policy and principles, which the cabinet ministers propose to cabinet. So if you are not a cabinet minister, you are not part of the process of the evolution of policy. That means that a minister who is not a cabinet minister cannot assent to or present a bill or agreement to Parliament if that minister is not a cabinet minister, and therefore is not part of the process of the formulation of policy and principle. If that is the case, as I believe it is, why have such huge number of ministers in the first place? Again, it's important for us to do serious introspection on this and interrogate the Constitution. The Constitution provides in Article 76(1) that there shall be a cabinet which shall consist of the president, the vice president, and not less than 10 and not more than 19 ministers of state. And quote, given the role of ministers of state, who cabinet ministers are, that is for running the state efficiently and assisting the president in the determination of policy of his government. It is my contention that apart from regional ministers, the number of central government ministers may not have to exceed 19, as contained in the Constitution. And that means ministries shall also not have to exceed 19. All ministers, to be relevant and to be able to assist in the evolution and determination of policy in their sectors, must be cabinet ministers. The excess numbers must be cut off, and that will significantly reduce public expenditure. For the avoidance of doubt, the Constitution must provide for that.
Some thoughts that we will explore today. And a very good person to help us in discussing these particular issues is our first guest, the Honorable Inusah Fuseini. Honorable Inusah A.B. Fuseini is a legal practitioner and a member of the 7th Parliament of the 4th Republic of Ghana, who represented the people of the Tamale Central constituency. He was a Minister of State, originally Lands and Natural Resources, and then later Roads and Highways in the John Dramani Mahama administration between 2013 and 2017. He also served as a Deputy Minister of Energy under the late Professor J.E.A. Mills government between 2010 and January 2013. While in Parliament, Honorable Inusah Fuseini served as the chairman of the Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee between 2009 and 2010, and was a ranking member of the Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee between 2017 and 2020. He was also a member of the European Union, African, Caribbean and Pacific Joint Parliament Assembly, the European Union and African, Caribbean, Pacific Joint Parliamentary Assembly, the EU-ACP-JPA, from 2009, 2010, and 2017 to 2020. Thank you very much for joining us, Honorable Inusah Fuseini.
Thank you.
May I ask you to go ahead with your presentation on your case for constitutional review? I would particularly like to ask your thoughts on the majority leader's positions on the configuration of our government, how we have filled our offices, and that's its impact on our government system.
Definitely, when you're done with your presentation. So.
Very well.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Samson, last week I was at Jimpa to participate in the Jimpa Law Week. And in one of the sessions, a group of young men came out to present a paper. They bemoaned the lack of inclusiveness or the assumption that only people of a certain age can aspire to be president. They felt, and rightly so, that they had been excluded. And they clearly stated and argued that the wisdom to run a country does not reside in the head of older people alone. Now, there's evidence to that because they cited the Danish Prime Minister, They cited our first president and the age at which he was when he became president, prime minister and president. They cited Jerry John Rawlings and his age at the time he led the coup in 1979 and 1982. Now, again, when the majority leader, Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, was presenting his paper, did you look at the demographic spread? Only young guys. The hall was filled with young guys. These young guys feel excluded. And they are those complaining, and rightly so. So let me make my case for constitutional reform. Samson, Ghana's fourth attempt at constitutional democratic rule began, and like everybody knows, on 7th January 1993, when the president and parliament, a president and members of parliament of the First Republic, of the first parliament of the Fourth Republic was sworn into office under the Constitution. That was approved in the national referendum held on 28th of April 1992. The Constitution established a framework of government for Ghana in the hope that the framework shall ensure, and in quote, shall ensure for ourselves, or secure for ourselves and posterity the blessings of liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity. In order to realize these aspirations, the 1992 Constitution of Ghana chose as a basic structure a novel system of government, a hybrid. The basic government framework under the 1992 Constitution is a fusion between the presidential system of government as prevails in the United States of America and the Westminster parliamentary system of government as practiced in the United Kingdom. And this has been alluded to by the majority leader. This fusion finds expression in Article 78(1) of the Constitution. Article 78(1) allows the president, in exercise of his executive authority under Article 58 of the Constitution, to choose ministers of state from among members of parliament, in quote. The 1992 Constitution also provides for the directive principles of state policy in Chapter 6 of the Constitution. These principles have been said to be guiding principles to guide, quote, to guide all citizens, parliament, the president, the judiciary, the council of state, the cabinet, political parties, and other bodies and persons in applying and interpreting this Constitution or any other law, and in taking or implementing policy decisions for the establishment of a just and free society. I mean, you can never cease to be amazed at the values that the Constitution prescribes that we should attain. And this is provided for in Article 34(1). It is worth noting that Chapter 6 of the Constitution has been until recently held by the Supreme Court of Ghana not to be justiciable. See the case of Ghana Lotto operators against National Lotto Authority. Our traditional institution, or traditional social institution, the institution of chieftaincy, is dealt with in Chapter 24 and emphasizes in Article 271 that the institution of chieftaincy, together with the traditional councils established by customary law and usage, is hereby guaranteed. So we preserved the institution of chieftaincy under our Constitution. The Constitution also, in Chapter 5, contains an inexhaustible cocktail of rights and freedoms. Inexhaustible. I mean, 33(5) makes those rights inexhaustible. Like all other written constitutions, the 1992 Constitution provides for how it can be amended, because it's a constitution. And that is in Chapter 6. The chapter employs a binary approach to the classification of the provisions of the Constitution. That is, entrenched and non-entrenched provisions. And has prescribed amendment procedures for the different categories, flexible and or rigid. The President of the Republic of Ghana, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, at a recent swearing-in of some board members of the National Commission on Civic Education, is reported to have said that the 1992 Constitution has provided bedrock for the longest uninterrupted, stable period of governance in Ghana, in Ghana's turbulent history. And this is reported in Modern Ghana on the 23rd day of March 2023. And clearly, the Constitution is 30 years old, the longest. The first Republican Constitution, 1960 to 1966, 6 years old, or less than 6 years. The second Republican Constitution under Buzia, less than 2 years old, or about 2 years old. The third Republican Constitution, the 1979 Constitution under Liban, less than 2 years old. And so this is the longest constitution, the constitution that has served as the longest. And so, I mean, we should commend the framers of the Constitution for their foresight in providing us with a Constitution that has secured us some level of stability. Now, according to the report of the Constitutional Review Committee, the 1992 Constitution is a resilient foundation for good governance in Ghana. It has been the basis for the flourishing institutions under the Fourth Republic and has potential of guiding the evolution of the nation's institutions towards peace, prosperity, and a good life for its people. Under the Constitution, 5, and now 8. When they were writing, it was 5. Now 8 successful presidential and parliamentary elections have been conducted. 2, now 3 of them involving a transfer of power from a ruling party to an opposition party. However, the Commission finds, and this was their finding, the Commission finds that there are many areas of the Constitution and of constitutional practice that need to change for the better. Note that. I'll come back to it. And this is found in page 3 of the report. One can therefore conclude that the 1992 Constitution has delivered political stability as compared to previous constitutions. The question is, has the 1992 Constitution delivered the promise of good life, prosperity, and development? Has it been able to deal with the ills of maladministration, corruption, wastage, and recklessness in the use of public resources? Has it delivered on the promise of equality of opportunities as promised in the preamble of the Constitution? Recently, at a meeting organized by the African Center for Economic Transformation in collaboration with the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs at the Marriott Hotel, Accra, I stated that constitutions in democratic settings are designed to check the exercise of power or authority by duty bearers. By establishing rules, institutions, structures, procedures, processes, standards, and so on, which regulate the exercise of authority of public office holders. Consequently, in the 1992 Constitution, there are substantive, procedural, and institutional limitations imposed on duty bearers in the exercise of their authority. This is the essence or ought to be the essence of constitutionalism, checks and balances. It therefore goes without saying that where the rules, institutions, structures, procedures, processes are weak and corrupt, the Constitution might not be able or will not be able to deliver on the democratic dividend, to wit, prosperity and development. This might explain why this committee, the Constitution Review Commission, titled their report thus, From a Political to a Developmental Constitution. This is why I make a case for constitutional reform, to tighten the loose ends, to make our institutions responsive and responsible, to make our government more accountable, to insulate our institutions against partisan political manipulation, to fight corruption, and to enhance trust through transparency. Intufo, an Attorney General, reported in the 1980 Ghana Law Report at page 637, so Waje, as he then was, speaking for the court at page 647, stated that a written constitution such as ours is not an ordinary act of parliament. It embodies the will of the people. It mirrors his history. He goes on to conclude. It contains within it aspirations and hopes for a better and fuller life. It contains within it their aspirations and hopes for a better and fuller life. I must hasten to add that I am not unaware of the existence of views of other people who think and believe that the Constitution, being a living document capable of growth, coupled with the fact that constitutions are normally skeletal frameworks, it should be left to the province of the courts to provide the ingredients that will ensure its growth through the utilization of the interpretative jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. The chief proponent of this view appears to me, in my humble view, to be the President of the Republic of Ghana, who has cautioned campaigners for constitutional reforms to hasten slowly. Festina lente, he says. The President did not, however, make haste slowly when he decided to appoint a record number of judges to the apex court of the land, even in the face of an existing caution by the African Peer Review Committee against packing the courts. And I just heard Mensa-Bonsu say that, ask a question, can we trust our Supreme Court, our courts? Moreover, the recent reversal of the Supreme Court of the United States of America of the decision in Roe and Wade does not give campaigners like myself comfort. It is my considered view that a political solution to the perceived weakness of the Constitution is the way to go. So there is the need to trigger Chapter 25 of the 1992 Constitution. I therefore vote for constitutional reform. To conclude, my people in Dabong, the Dogombes, have a saying which loosely translates thus: the fact that you cannot do all, you cannot accomplish all, should not prevent you, should not stop you from doing some, from accomplishing some. Thus, if a total overhaul as canvassed by the Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, is not possible or will be difficult to accomplish. There are some provisions of the Constitution which are literally asking to be amended, and I will shortly proceed to set them forth. Article 43 of the Constitution and 44 of the Constitution deal with the Electoral Commission. Now, the Electoral Commission is appointed by the President on the advice of the Council of State. The Electoral Commission is a public office. The appointment on the advice of the appointment of the President on the advice of the Council of State has resulted in trust deficits for the Electoral Commission. I believe that we can cure this, and we should cure it. We should cure it by amending Article 43 of the Constitution to read, the Electoral Commission shall be appointed by the President on the advice of the Public Services Commission with the prior approval of Parliament by a 2/3 majority. So what do you have here? You have properly located the Electoral Commission, which is a public office by creation, within the Public Services Commission. And it's not new, it's not novel. When Kenya was confronted with the situation of an Electoral Commission they could trust, they gave that responsibility to the Public Services Commission, who caused publications to be made, adverts to be made, inviting applications for the post of an Electoral Commission of Kenya. And interviews were conducted. Now, the 2/3 majority requirement inserted by my proposal will also ensure that we have a bipartisan consensus in Parliament. We have a bipartisan consensus in Parliament. Lack of bipartisan consensus has been the bane of the attempted or aborted amendments that have come before Parliament. Now, Article 44 of the Constitution, which is also on the Electoral Commission, just puts the commissioner and the deputy on terms, similar to a judge of the Court of Appeal. Similar to the judge of the Court of Appeal. And so, I propose that there should be a term limit for the Electoral Commission. Now, for the amendment of the Electoral Commission to be a public office, you can look at Article 70 as well. If Article 70, because Article 70 establishes public offices, you can amend the Electoral Commission. It establishes the Council of State. You can amend the Council of State to read Public Services Commission. Instead of the President appointing on the advice of the Council of State, the President should appoint on the advice of the Public Services Commission. And the Public Services Commission will institute procedures. Now, appointment of justices to the Supreme Court. Fortunately, Article 1281 of the Constitution is not an entrenched provision. It's not an entrenched provision. And so, my recommendation is to put a cap on the number of appointments a president can make to the Supreme Court at any given time. And I think that cap should be between 12 and 15. Now, it appears to me that Articles 142 to 144 on the regional tribunals should be deleted because it has fallen into disuse. We don't have regional tribunals. Meanwhile, it is in our Constitution. Now, I'm just wrapping up. Now, we have Article 78(1), which deals with appointment by the President from among members of Parliament a majority of which must come from Parliament. My view is that should be amended. And that should be amended to exclude appointment from members of Parliament by the President of members of Parliament to be ministers of state. And there should be a cap on the number of ministers the President can appoint. And that is Article 78(2) ought to be amended. Article 71 should be deleted in its entirety because it appears to me to conflict, to be inconsistent, not conflict, to be inconsistent with Article 17 of the Constitution, which deals with non-discrimination. Both officers under Article 71 and are public officers. All officers under Article 71 are public officers. And so there should not be discrimination between Article 71 office holders and all other office holders. So I think that the Independent Emolument Committee, as recommended by the Constitution Review Committee, should be looked at and substituted for the arrangement in Article 71.
Okay.
And lastly, all heads of independent constitutional bodies should be appointed through a process put in place by the Public Services Commission with prior approval of 2/3 majority from Parliament. So thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Fuseini. You have made some really interesting points, and I wish we had all the time in the world to delve into some of them.
You're right.
But I'm going to ask a question about your Article 43 recommendation, because I also agree that there's a lot that there's a lot of power that we pile into the president that creates opportunities for undue inflation, I suppose, of the president, of the executive powers. But you recommend that the electoral commissioner and his deputy should be appointed by the Public Services Commission. And the idea is to take away from the president the power to set up this important body that we must trust. But my problem with the Public Services Commission being the appointing authority or the nominating authority is that the Public Service Commission is under Article 70 completely appointed by the president. All of its members are appointed by the president. So
Yes.
you end up with a situation where you are given with one hand and taking with the other, really.
Yes.
I was wondering if you had considered what we can do to create a substantive check rather than a check that looks inform only. It's one of my problems with a lot of the provisions of checks and balances in the 1992 Constitution, that we give with one hand and then defeat that power by some other provision.
So when that power is given to the Public Services Commission, now the Public Services Commission must then produce a guidelines for the exercise of that power. How are they going to exercise that power? Okay. Now, so if we have those guidelines, we can hold the Public Services Commission accountable. But because we don't have those guidelines, or because they are not published, we are unable to hold them. So if we transit all independent constitutional bodies to the Public Services Commission, because these independent constitutional bodies are public offices anyway, so we transfer them to the Public Services Commission, then the Public Services Commission will be enjoined to put in place guidelines, a transparent system that can be monitored, that can be followed by all of us in the choice of persons to fill those positions. And then we will be building strong institutions.
So what will be our recourse if we don't like how the Public Services Commission is using this power? Because the electoral commissioner, once appointed, is almost
Maame,
who at least conducts themselves well is unremovable. So we may not like. So once we take it out of the.
So Maame, doctor, what it means is simply that when those processes are published, and then the Public Services Commission violates or contravenes its very processes of appointing somebody to any of the positions so advertised or so listed, if the constitutional amendment goes through, then we have recourse to resort to the courts.
But this is the same court you're saying you're not comfortable with leading.
No, I'm not comfortable with the court interpreting the Constitution. I'm not comfortable. And it is not only, my discomfort is not only limited to Ghana. I have looked at the Roe and Wade case, and I think that where there is a general preponderance of the appointing, of the judges of the Supreme Court towards a particular political ideology, they might interpret constitutions to give effect to that ideology. That's why I'm not comfortable with them leading or providing the ingredients to clothe the skeletal framework of our constitution. But in areas where they can use their prerogative writs, mandamus, certiorari, and all those to ensure quo warranto, to ensure that compliance or obeisance is paid to the guiding principles, to the principles established for the purposes of appointing people to public offices, we might be able to cure, or it might be a lesser evil.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Honorable Inusah Fuseini. And I can assure you that there are a lot more questions for you to answer. If you have patience with that, at the tail end, we will be able to bring you some more of the questions. Now, shall we go to our next guest? She's not a lawyer, so let's hope that she doesn't introduce us to too much legalese. Bridgette Dzogbenuku is the founder, executive director of Mentoring Women Ghana, an organization born from her belief that women in leadership make economic and developmental sense. For 12 years, she was the first general manager of Aviation Social Center, a fitness and recreational center in Accra, where she introduced various innovative fitness programs and events into this niche industry in Ghana. Bridgette is a fellow of the Vital Voices Leadership Network and has participated in various Vital Voices leadership training programs, including the Fortune U.S. State Department Global Women's Mentoring Partnership 2008, V-Lead 2014, and VV Engage 2019. She won the 2008 Fortune Goldman Sachs Global Women's Leadership Award. Bridgette ran for political office as the running mate, vice presidential candidate, to the flag bearer of the Progressive People's Party in Ghana's 2016 general elections as presidential candidate in Ghana's general election, and she was the presidential candidate substantive in the 2020 elections. You must have heard her before, and she believes that a lot has to change in the Constitution. Bridgette, thank you very much. Let's hear you in the next 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll ask our questions.
Yeah, thanks. I am having issues hearing you, so
we can hear you clearly. We can hear you clearly
and see me. That one. Oh. I can't hear you at all, but I'm going to assume that I can be heard and be seen. And I would like to say thank you very much for this opportunity to join you once again on the Joy Change Speaker Series, and once again to touch on the subject of the need for a constitutional review, which is gradually gaining traction and relevance in our country. I thank you for acknowledging that this message that my party, the Progressive People's Party, has harped on in the last 10 years of its existence. Indeed, it's been in existence for 10 years. And the message for the need of constitutional amendment has started to hit home and resound with many of us Ghanaians. I would like to mention that my delivery this morning is a collaborative effort of many of the members of the Progressive People's Party over the years. The ideals with which I identified and therefore chose to join as a vice presidential candidate in 2016. Indeed, portions of this delivery have been presented at a recent IEA program. It is worth mentioning that no other political party in Ghana has remained so resolute, committed, consistent, and vocal on the subject matter of the constitutional review in Ghana as we have. We made representations to the Constitutional Review Commission, Constitutional Review Implementation Committee, the Presidency, Parliament, and the Council of State on these matters. It would therefore seem that successive elected governments have demonstrated a clear and present lack of political will to make necessary changes to our 1992 constitution. Until now, that I can see, the majority leader was just talking about it. The president said something to the effect in the clip that she showed. But as someone from one of the major parties said to preside over their own demise, that this is how the two major parties, or the parties that have been in government, have thought about it, that in the exercise of our natural and inalienable rights to which shall secure for ourselves and posterity the blessing of liberty, stress mind, equality of opportunity, and prosperity, in the spirit of friendship and peace with all peoples of the world, and in solemn declaration and affirmation of our commitment to freedom, justice, probity, and accountability. The principle that all powers of government spring from the sovereign will of the people. The principle of universal adult suffrage, the rule of law, the protection and preservation of fundamental human rights and freedoms, unity and stability for clearly, the essential elements which constitute our aspirations from the preamble include blessings of liberty, equal opportunity, prosperity for the people, freedom and justice, probity and accountability, universal adult suffrage, and the stability of our great nation. It is evident that after 3 solid decades of operating this document, several of the aspirations have eluded the good people of Ghana. The state of affairs now. Our country is yet to derive the dividends of democratic governance, and I think I heard the other day that the president of Zambia was also saying the same. The conduct of peaceful elections and the successive transfer of power have been used as an indicator of success of our democracy, without evaluating the actual improvement in the lives of the people. And that makes me look at the title of your program today, which says, "If you do democracy, we go chop." So there's without evaluating the improvement in the lives of the people in the area of education for every citizen, access to basic social amenities such as water, electricity, affordable housing, infrastructural development, housing, jobs for the youth, political accountability, reduction in corruption, and economic stability. What we have to show for 30 years of democratic governance is massive levels of youth unemployment, excessive powers of the executive arm of government, as your previous speaker said, Alhaji Inusah, a grossly compromised parliament, abuse of power, unbridled corruption, waste of Ghana's resources, nepotism, mediocrity, mismanagement of the economy, and the constant failure of leadership. In fact, the current constitution, in our view, has created a situation where the winning political parties have treated the republic as a colony to be conquered, and its resources taken for the welfare of a privileged few members of the party in power, making subjects of the citizenry and depriving most Ghanaians the dividends of the well-constituted democratic state. The stability of the country is therefore threatened by sheer greed, elite capture, and an intensely exclusionary political system, where citizenship is no longer enough of a requirement to have access to state resources and to partake in the sharing of the national cake. A citizen must necessarily require membership of the party in power to benefit from the welfare of the state. So the winner takes all 1992 constitution cannot sustain a democracy beyond the near future, and therefore the urgent need to implement the following fundamental constitutional amendments. I will focus on 5 fundamental changes that need immediate attention to guarantee some progress if Ghana is to gain or get any dividends in our last democratic experiment. For us in the PPP, we are choosing the 5 areas, not necessarily for a complete review of a 1,000-page document, although we agree that there are many other areas that need amendments, and the previous speaker mentioned a few of those. We believe that these 5 are critical to start a progressive development, as he said, a progressive development trajectory at all levels in our governance. These include 1, returning power to the people for all Ghanaians to directly elect their district's municipal and metropolitan chief executives without any interference of their operations from the president, and cancelling government appointees to the district assemblies. 2, prohibit members of parliament from being appointed as ministers of state, or MPs must resign from parliament when they are appointed as ministers. And I think the majority speaker mentioned that in the previous clip that you showed. 3, strengthen the office of the Attorney General by separating it from the Ministry of Justice. 4, introduce a public declaration assets regime. And your previous speaker and I have been in a forum where we've actually spoken about that before. And 5, clarify the eligibility of Ghanaians in the diaspora to hold public office. Let's talk first about the number 1, MMDCs. It will be superfluous to recount the benefits of electing directly and by universal adult suffrage, municipal, and district chief executives, the district assemblies. We would like to emphasize that the concept of government appointees should also be completely abolished. Government appointees to the district assemblies, yes, with elected government.
Its feed has not been the best. The network keeps breaking. Hope that we get a better connection to her shortly.
Past legislation have now arrogated to themselves the role of development agents with no constitutionally allocated resources. The result is that MPs resort to all kinds of unorthodox ways and policy violations to attempt to bring some development to the people. You see, as the previous speaker was saying, or the majority speaker in the clip you showed, because the MPs whose job it is to pass legislation have arrogated themselves the role of development agents, their budgets for their campaigns are bloated. And this, if we allow ourselves, if we are let to vote for our own MMDCs and DCs, would actually lessen their burden of the country.
He's making some really far-reaching recommendations for far-reaching changes there. Of course, some of what he says coincide with what our previous speakers are saying. We're hoping that her network stabilizes. We're trying to reconnect with her on a connection that we suspect should be a lot more reliable. But as you say, as you heard there, she's selected, and this position, she says, is that of the Progressive People's Party, which she has been vice presidential candidate and also presidential candidate. Election of DC is important to them. Separation of the Attorney General, you know, which has been a debate that has gone on for quite a while. Asset declaration regime, diaspora vote, clarity that is required. So please proceed with your presentation. Hello, Bridgette. Did we lose her on the line? Okay, we just lost her, so we'll re-establish contact with her so she can complete her presentation. Remember, we have Professor Baffour Ajimanduya, governance, person par excellence, to also make his delivery and take some questions from you and from us. We also have Ace Anan Ankomah. You have heard him write recently, amending the Constitution we deserve. All right. Thank you very much. I hope your line is better now. Please proceed.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Did we lose her again? Okay, it does appear we lost her again. So this is Newsfile. It is your special edition, and this is your Joy Change Speakers Forum, and this is 4th edition. We are focusing on Constitution review on the 30th anniversary of the Constitution of Ghana. Please, let's hear you continue with your presentation.
That would be me, Samson, I believe.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. And I wonder where you lost me, so I'll try and... So I was talking about the voting of the MMDCs and the fact that the MPs arrogate the role of development agents to themselves. But the office of the chief executive has instead become a trophy to be won and hijacked by elected political parties to reward party members who could neither become MPs nor ministers of state. Interestingly, while the MMDC elections are supposedly not partisan, we have seen general secretaries of ruling parties traveling around the country to conduct a so-called vetting of applicants, mostly foot soldiers who have applied to become MMDCs. The political party has become a substitute for the established Public Services Commission, as your previous speaker said, for the vetting and appointment of candidates to occupy public office. And this is happening because we have a winner-takes-all executive, which must ensure that all MMDCs are party members who deserve the position and indeed will toe the line of the party. The devolution of power in the election of the district chief executive remains a democratic deficit and a major impediment in the development of the various smaller units that constitute Ghana. Elected officials will demand their resources allocated by the Constitution through the District Assembly Common Fund without fear or favor, and will receive them promptly for local development. Currently, the center, which is the government, solely determines whether the assemblies need machetes or Wellington boots, for example, and choose to use part of their allocated budget to procure these items to be sent to the district. Most often than not, these items are useless to the assemblies who cannot complain for fear of removal. The appointed authority has effectively denied them the funds the districts actually need. A DCE can demand and possibly, an elected DCE can demand and possibly sue the central government to demand full payment of the allocated funds when the DCE is accountable to his electorate, and knows he will be voted out if he doesn't act. Elections of MMDCs will ensure local accountability, elimination of corruption, and rapid development. Indeed, if citizens can elect the president, who is almost far removed from them in Accra, and members of parliament, they should be credited with the wisdom to decide who governs them at the local level. A couple of years ago, there was a supposed attempt to do this. However, it would seem that there was no real political will, else the necessary amendments would have happened without the national drama we witnessed, which led to the suspension of the well-publicized referendum. It was suspended apparently because there was no consensus according to an official statement. But how else could we have ensured whether there was consensus without allowing the people to vote on that question? Whose consensus was sought? In our view, the question of whether MMDCs should be elected on partisan basis, which triggered the referendum, was not necessary at all. We can elect our chief executives tomorrow if Parliament decides that it is necessary, it is making the necessary amendments without going for a referendum today. All that we need to do now is for Parliament to amend the Articles 242D, which deals with the appointment of the 1/3 of Assembly members, and Articles 2431 and 2433, which deals with the appointment and disappointment, if you like, of the chief executive. These are non-entrenched provisions in the Constitution. Both the NDC and NPP are very much aware, but both parties stand to benefit from appointing MMDCs to the detriment of the people. So they choose to go through a referendum to deny Ghanaians their rights. As I said, someone said to me, no one wants to preside over their own demise, indeed. The question of the partisan election arises under Article 55.3. This article does not in any way deal with whether an MMDC can be elected or appointed. It only prohibits political parties from participating in district level elections. So it's our view that we can start electing MMDCs now and allow the process to run for some time. Then we can look at whether political parties should be allowed to participate or not in the future. As we say, water finds its own level. The people and the results will begin to show after 2 successive elections. Our second point on the constitutional amendments is to separate MPs from ministers, so amending Article 78(1). The need for strict separation of powers cannot be overemphasized, and I believe that also was said by the majority leader in the clip you showed. Since the current arrangements where the 1992 Constitution, by design, bequeathed Parliament to the executive, and has hampered Parliament's ability to exact accountability from the executive on behalf of the people. Article 78(1) mandates the president to appoint majority of his ministers from Parliament. This means that more than half of the ministers and deputy ministers must be members of Parliament. Every member of Parliament in the ruling party therefore hopes to make the president's honor roll for a ministerial appointment. Checking the government against malfeasance cannot therefore be their priority. Besides ministerial appointments, some members of parliament are also appointed as board chairs and members of boards of directors of state-owned enterprises, corporations, and other institutions, thereby compromising the supervisory role of parliament. This has resulted in a compromised parliament, which is obviously ineffective in scrutinizing the activities of the executive to guarantee the judicious application of the nation's resources. One of the many reasons why the fight against corruption has been very difficult for Ghana. The phenomenon of appointing ministers from within parliament invariably denies parliament of the very useful human resources and the role for which the MP himself ran for office. Given the option to choose his ministers from beyond parliament, the president will have the opportunity to choose from the rich Ghanaian brains and the expertise to work with, whilst the elected legislature do their work of scrutinizing the executive. According to Professor Michael Quay, the immediate past Speaker of Parliament, the power of the executive is so much that it determines the seating arrangement in Parliament. How can this be? The separation of powers will take the hands of the executive from Parliament completely. It is our position that if a member of Parliament is appointed as a minister or accepts any other appointment by the president, then he must resign his seat before taking up the appointment. People who seek to become public officers must choose to either become part of the legislature or the executive to avoid conflicts of interest. Our third point is the Attorney General. Amend Article 88. Article 88 of the Constitution should be amended to separate the Attorney General from the Minister of Justice, or more specifically, the Attorney General must not be a Minister of State, nor a member of the government. We believe that making the Attorney General a Minister of State compromises his or her ability to fight and prosecute political corruption cases, for example. The failure of the Special Prosecutor's Office and its lack of independence is clear to all of us now. What we need to fight political corruption effectively is the immediate establishment of an independent Public Prosecutor's Office separate from the Minister of Justice. This is the only way to realistically fight corruption. So we are calling for a truly independent Attorney General, that is, an independent public prosecutor, whose budget will be sanctioned by Parliament without any ministerial interference. It is evident from our past experience that it will be fruitless to leave the fight against corruption in the hands of an elected government and its appointees. For this reason, we propose that the Independent Public Prosecutor, IPP, should be elected directly by the people to check the government against political corruption. The People's Prosecutor will be elected on a different electoral cycle, preferably during the midterm of an elected government. The Independent Public Prosecutor will be given all the vast prosecutorial powers with guaranteed tenure of office, independence, and adequate funding directly from Parliament to go after corrupt government officials. The government's own lawyer then will be the Minister of Justice under this proposal. Can we imagine if someone like Martin Amidu got elected and had direct funding from Parliament to do his work without any ministerial interference? Our next point is the public declaration of assets. Amend Article 2861 and 2863.
On one of your last two issues, yes. A minute.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I have a minute to go.
That is so.
Okay. So, public declaration of assets. We continue to hide declaration of assets, the documents for the declaration of assets, in an envelope. We put it in an envelope, it's sealed, and it's presented. We are saying that every public official, anybody who is appointed into public office, must openly declare their assets. It must be published and the public must have access to it so that we know how their assets are. We can compare when they are out of office or when they are going out of office. The last point is Ghanaians in the diaspora. We have many Ghanaians in the diaspora who are contributing to our economy on a very large scale. We have many Ghanaians in the diaspora who are skilled, who are experienced, who have brains, and we must amend Article 94 to or clarify it so that they can vote. We must not make people, we must give our Ghanaians in the diaspora citizenship over their dual citizenship.
All right.
The fact that they are dual citizens cannot make does not make them unable to be full citizens.
All right. Thank you. Thank you
We declared it on December 7, 2021. We declared it as a Fix the Constitution Day. It is Constitution Day. We are saying hashtag Fix the Constitution Day. Each 7th December 2021, let's go and see what else we can amend on this constitution. As we say, it's a living document.
Okay.
And it must
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Bridgette Dzogbenuku. And I'll invite our guest, if you can, time yourself, so that at least when you are at the 15th minute, you would know how to end. So I reserve my questioning. I suppose Maame may have one or two things, but not a question. Maame, you want to make a brief comment before we proceed to take a break and then bring our other guest?
Yes, I do. I think some of the points that the PPP through Bridgette raises are very valid, and it seems that we are all agreed on the overlap between the legislature and the executive. And as far back as President Baffour's time, even President Baffour himself complained that it makes them inefficient ministers, but also makes them inefficient MPs. And so while the committee meant well with this hybrid system, my position has always been that it has left us with the worst of both worlds. We don't have the benefits of the presidential system because we don't have the friction that is required between the executive and the legislature to make them checks onto each other. But we also don't have the collaboration between, we don't have the accountability that the parliamentary system gives because they collaborate so much that you hold everybody responsible for any failure in the government. So we have ended up with the worst of both worlds. And so the interesting thing is that in spite of this constant consensus, we still haven't been able to do anything about it, which validates the position that the PPP is taking, that it is a question of interest, of will, where the people who must change it are the ones benefiting by it being that way. And so we have a bit of a hostage situation there. I'd like to finally comment before we go for the break on the idea of an independent public prosecutor, which I think that we all realize that there's a gap there. The problem I find is that we are constantly suggesting new institutions. We create more and more institutions. There's always overlaps. And the problem is not the existence of an institution, it is the structure of the institution. As Honorable Fuseini was saying, weak, corrupt institutions will do nothing. We can set up 80 of them. The important thing is to look at how we are setting them up, who we are empowering to supervise the person we are empowering, and how we are populating those offices. Because all of this overlap is resulting in not very much. In the end, if we separate the Attorney General from the Minister of Justice, if the president's appointing both of them, it's the same thing. So we have to think more deeply about institutional structure as opposed to creating institutions and giving them lists of functions or passing more legislation. And I think on that note, I will hand over.
Thank you. Brief comment by Dr. Maame Mensa-Bonsu. And we take a break here, and when we return, she will introduce our next guest. So you're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's the most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. And I'm privileged to be hosting this special edition together with Dr. Maame Mensa-Bonsu. And our guests have been delivering. Now, we invite you, if you are driving past Joy FM, just stop and ask for a copy of the Constitution. You'll be handed one. If you're driving past Joy FM Kokomlemle, just stop and ask for a copy of the Constitution. And we're going to plead with our other guests. If you can stick to 15 minutes in your presentation, we'll be exceedingly glad. Maame, take over. Please unmute your mic.
Sorry about that.
Right.
I'm honored to introduce our next guest, Professor Baffour Agyeman-Duah, who is the CEO of the John A. Kufuor Foundation. Professor Agyeman-Duah has served with the United Nations. He served for quite a long time, a decade, as senior governance advisor with the UNDP Tanzania and UNMIL Liberia. Prior to that, he was an associate executive director of the Center for Democratic Development, which he co-founded in 1998, and of which I'm a proud D&D fellow. Professor Agyeman-Duah was a Fulbright scholar, Fulbright professor at the Lagos Center for International Affairs of the University of Ghana from 1994 to 1996, and he taught African politics at Bennett College and the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, United States, between 1985 and 1994. The professor has published a number of monographs and articles in scholarly journals, which are quite respected across the world. We're honored to have you with us, Professor Baffour Agyeman-Duah, and if I may now invite you to go ahead with your case for constitutional review. Could we unmute the professor, please?
All right, you hear me now?
Yes, we
Wonderful.
do.
Yeah. Thanks, Samson, and for having me. I want to begin by paying tribute to those who really helped to produce the 92 Constitution. The Constitution upholds democracy to be the only form of government we should cherish, and has therefore given us a framework that has sustained democratic rule for 30 years. Today, we enjoy political predictability, and we change or retain governments every 4 years in relative peace. So no wonder Ghana today is lauded globally as one of the most stable and thriving democracies. So we have to appreciate the 92 Constitution. Unfortunately, however, the accolade appears to impress few Ghanaians. The applause for attaining a stable electoral democracy seems to have little meaning or significance to many Ghanaians. Not because people are oblivious of the achievement, but because of the growing disenchantment with practiced democracy in the country and the seeming failure of governance to yield both material and psychic dividends. The realization has dawned that elections by themselves do not make successful democracy. The relevance of practiced democracy is the issue at stake. If this key concern, practiced democracy, is real, and I believe it is, then a case should be made for a review of the 92 Constitution, which provides the framework for practiced democracy and governance in the country. I should perhaps at this point clarify the concept of democracy to make my presentation better understood and more meaningful. Like the two-edged sword, democracy has two mutually inclusive sides: principled democracy and practiced democracy. The first side, principled democracy, refers to the universal principles and values that all human beings deserve in order to live wholesome and dignified lives. Embedded in principled democracy is respect for freedom, liberty, justice, rule of law, and rights, values that uphold the dignity of the human life. These are what I call the intangibles of democracy, and controversies over their relevance are rare. The other side, practiced democracy, refers to institutions, systems, and human agency that must function to actualize the principles or values. The creation of this practical or tangible side of democracy must be informed and guided by the society's own history, tradition, and culture. So while principled democracy, which seeks to dignify the human life, is universal and written in stone, so to speak, practice democracy is variable and flexible and is based on the peculiarities of a society. This differentiation accounts for the varying ways democracy is practiced around the world. Democratic practice is therefore not a straitjacket, a one-size-fits-all affair. And this is where the controversies abound. From my perspective, much of the growing public frustration and disenchantment with governance in Ghana today come from the shortfalls in practice democracy. Our democratic practice is increasingly exclusive, divisive, and extremist, and is hampering economic progress. Most observers attribute the condition of exclusion, division, and extremism to the winner-takes-all electoral system, which is monopolized by two political parties, the NPP and the NDC. In this duopoly, a party winning elections, even with 1 percentage point, takes complete possession of the state, from the national to the local levels. The politics of exclusion, which is embedded in the winner-takes-all system, is perhaps the key reason for the heightened, unhealthy rivalry between the NDC and the NPP. The rabid partisanship has led to any party in opposition having to simply oppose and discredit the government of the day. It has led to the disgusting habit of claims and counterclaims over who built this road or that school. The unhealthy rivalry has led to the abandonment of projects initiated by preceding governments, irrespective of their relevance and how much has been sunk into it. Above all, it has led to short-sighted approach to development. Meanwhile, political party organization and electoral politics have been highly monetized. They have become a game for the rich and corrupt, as admitted publicly by some failed candidates. Votes of delegates at party primaries are bought, and the highest bidder often wins. At the national level, presidential candidates sell themselves with gifts and phantom promises. Needless to say, the cost of participation and the embedded corruption in party politics have excluded many individuals with promise, young and old, who otherwise would opt for public service. The dire consequences of corruption of the political process for our development have led to recent calls for state-funded political parties. Another key area where practice democracy in Ghana seems to have flopped is the actualization of political participation. For 30 years, we have limited the concept of participation to general elections and the multiplicity of the media that makes it possible for all voices from all corners to be heard. Not surprisingly, but sadly, many among us have reduced democracy to kambi, free speech and expression. The true meaning of political participation is for people having a direct role in decision-making on issues and policies that affect their lives. To a large extent, being able to determine their own destinies. That, I believe, is the idea behind local government as spelled out in Article 240 of the Constitution. However, the structure of governance has been such that decentralization that should ensure participation has been rendered meaningless. Participation should be bottom-up rather than top-down. Indeed, the bottom should be the breeding grounds for national politics. We find that vibrant democracies are where participation is more vigorous at the grassroots, with communities meeting, deciding, and charting their future. That is what I believe the Constitution designed the District Assembly for. Future leaders must gain experience in governance from the grassroots of politics, not just from university, getting into politics and being made ministers without any experience, never bought a bicycle, built a house, nothing, become a minister, corruption is planted there. But as I say, for 30 years of this republic, we can only speak of administrative, not political or fiscal decentralization that empower the assemblies to serve their true purpose. Political and fiscal power is retained at the central government, and the districts are made to beg for development projects from the ruling elite in Accra. Doesn't it strike you when on their rounds in the regions and districts, presidents are begged for mundane things like toilets? Why should a newly constructed school building in a village be locked up until some big man from Accra is available to declare it open? The Constitution, Article 242A, appear to require the statutory funds earmarked for district through the Assembly Fund, the Common Fund, are kept in Accra and released at the pleasure of the Minister of Finance. Reportedly, no government of this republic has ever paid up fully on the District Assembly Common Fund. In this case, tardiness and incompetence or recklessness as central government easily afflicts and disrupts governance and development at the districts. What our centralized democratic practice has done is to reduce the people into beggars, just as the central government, with bow in hand, begs foreign donors. Apart from those at the top of the political hierarchy, and mostly centered in the capital city, few Ghanaians have the opportunity to participate, to change their circumstances. Development thinking and initiation emerge mainly from the top, as if those at the bottom are incapable of their own salvation. So constitutional provisions for ensuring transparency and accountability appear weak and shrinking by the day. This is what is leading public officials oftentimes to act recklessly and with impunity in managing the country's resources. Corruption and naked thievery are therefore rampant across the board. Within the context of transparency and accountability is the idea of separation of powers in a democracy. It is to enable each of the three arms of government, the executive, legislature, and judiciary, to stay independent so they can hold each other in check and to account. Yet, the 92 Constitution invests so much power in the executive that the other two institutions seem subdued. The requirement for the president to appoint majority of ministers, as has been said previously, that weakens the latter, that's the legislature, in holding the former in check. The Constitution gives almost limitless discretionary and appointive powers to the president. And the power to appoint goes way beyond the cabinet, senior civil servants and heads of state agencies to district assembly members. Even appointment to institutions classified by the Constitution as independent are to be made by the president, who is a partisan. Yet, we expect these bodies to be neutral. So apart from the so-called independent bodies, the Constitution places no limit on numbers and levels to be appointed. This loophole and the discretion to create ministries and agencies at will enables self-aggrandizing presidents to indulge in creating additional positions with or without justification and unmindful of the burden on the taxpayer. Increasingly, presidential appointments have become the means to creating jobs for party members, friends, and family. That is why debates and controversies have emerged in recent times over the number of ministers, Supreme Court justices, directors and CEOs and their deputies of state agencies the president ought to appoint. The latest attempt by Parliament to block the president's ministerial appointments was premised on the popular call for reduction in the size of government. The foregoing cases of constitutional lapses are among the reasons why strong voices have emerged, including mine, for reviewing the 92 Constitution. Despite its beneficence, the Constitution has so many deficits that upend good governance. So we must review it and get it right this time. While appreciating the diligence with which the Constitution was framed, we should also recognize its unique and unhealthy circumstance of birth. It came against the backdrop of 11 years of illiberal and intimidating military rule of the PNDC. And it's the same regime that supervised the framing of the Constitution. The regime indeed resisted change and only yielded when it could no longer stand against the wind of change. The wind included assertive civil society, the donor community, and the global democratic tidal wave unleashed by the collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s. So the Constitution and the transition to liberal democracy in 1993, therefore, cannot be said to have been given on a silver platter or out of the goodness or democratic proclivities of the PNDs. It was rushed, given the circumstance, and therefore it missed critical introspection and debate. So far, three schools of thought emerged regarding the debate on constitutional review. The first group of people are called the rejectionists, are people who believe that's not necessary at this time because they believe the Constitution has served us well. So if it ain't broken, why fix it? They seem to say. Then there's a second school of thought. That is those who prefer limited reforms or, just tampering with the amendments. They want us to be careful. We should not rush to amend. And I think President Akufo-Addo's comments we saw at the beginning of the program reflects that. Then the third school of thought, those who want comprehensive review, that's a radical view in this context. It's found mostly among young people and civil society groups who are impatient and show extreme frustration with the status quo. They want change, either by reviewing, reforming, or amending it. I understand that constitutions should not be needlessly tampered with. The American Constitution, which is 234 years old, has been amended only 27 times, most recently in 1992, though there have been over 11,000 proposed amendments since it became operational in 1789. However, and this is important, however, we should not miss the reason why the American and other veteran democracies have preserved and avoided unnecessary tampering of their constitutions. Their draft constitutions were written following lengthy, elaborate, and meticulous preparation, including extensive and intense intellectual debates. They also paid heed to the practiced democracy by being guided by their history, tradition, and culture. They did not copy blindly from others. And I believe we cannot say the same for our 92 Constitution. That's why I make the case for reviewing our Constitution. And I have a few recommendations. First of all, I think we should advance inclusive politics by introducing proportional representation, a system where parties gain seats in parliament in proportion to the number of votes that they obtain in elections. And this, I think, will bring more parties into parliament. It will mitigate the unbridled partnership and the winner takes all syndrome. We should also redefine power distribution between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary to enhance accountability between governance and structures at the local level. And I think local governance should be enhanced with political and fiscal decentralization so that the assemblies can become the key agencies for community development. We should also think seriously and see a more dynamic role for chiefs at the local level in the districts. Chiefs can be made district assembly presiders so that they can be part and parcel. After all, they own the lands in these areas. Then my biggest takeaway, I should say, let me veer a little bit. I think we can even begin to think outside the box. Given the intense rivalries and all these kind of things, why can't we think seriously about a uniting for peace and progress agenda? An interim special constitutional arrangement for a unity or union government. We shouldn't be afraid of the word union because it's been used previously. Because I think if you look at the fact that all the countries that were in league with in the 1950s have moved beyond third world position to second and first world, Singapore, Malaysia, and all of them, they all spent about 20 to 30 years to change their circumstances. In Africa, I think Rwanda, President Kagame is almost in the same mode. Within 20 years, Rwanda has changed, all because there's unity of purpose. There's a single vision towards development. There's no kahoo like we find. You don't get parliamentarians throwing punches. All that, I think we can stop it if we come together, declaring, uniting for peace and progress for 20 years, and let's have a focused development. And I think we can see a real change in our country. I think on that note, I will yield.
Thank you very much.
Maame, what comments would you have about what Professor Baffour Ajmandua has delivered?
Yeah, I think that we see the district assemblies coming up in several presentations.
Yes.
And decentralization seems to be a big thing with us. Since the constitutional process began, we've been talking about decentralization, participation, grassroots, but everybody seems dissatisfied. And personally, I think the district assemblies are currently our most useless expenditure on our budgets, because it is structured to make no impact, to just, it's like fetching water with a sieve. So we really do need to rethink the district assemblies. It's not just a question of electing the DCEs. That is an important part of it, but perhaps we should consider more thoroughly what they've been set up for, how we can achieve those goals, and how we fund them. And that critically will help us make use of it. As Professor said, the chiefs are an important part of our lives. They're not going anywhere. And they have a lot of social capital and a system that, when it's working, works. What we have done, I think, currently is kind of take them out of the system in a way that does not give them accountability for what we do or do not achieve together. And so they operate kind of in a parallel way. And I think bringing them into the system a bit more might be a useful way to proceed, though we must be careful to not create the kind of collusion that the colonial state created with the chiefs. So that's a place we have to do some real thinking and make use of what we have, rather than try and erase them. My challenge with the Unigov proposal is not the union government itself. It's that Prof hasn't given us any real verbs. When we talk of coming together and focusing on a development agenda, what does that mean? How do we do it? I think part of our constitutional narrative has always been lofty sentiments, but translating the sentiments into action has always proved a little bit more illusionary. So I think while the idea of having a 20-year, say, development project, national journey is not in itself a bad idea, and it's a great thing, and that's in essence what our constitution was supposed to be, I think we have to speak more clearly in how we do that. How do we come together? Do we hold rallies? Do we call a conference? Do we change our educational syllabus so our children are thinking about national development goals by the time they're in year 5? What are the actual verbs of coming together? That would be what I would like Prof to address later when we get a chance to engage.
All right.
Sure.
Great. Let's bring on our next change speaker on the matter of constitution, which he's no stranger to. Oliver Barker-Vormawor is a social justice lawyer with extensive professional and academic experience in international and constitutional law. Between January 2010 to December 2011, he served as a constitutional researcher and the Justice Sector Reform Advisor to Ghana's Constitution Review Commission, which was appointed by President Atta Mills to assess the strengths and weaknesses of Ghana's 1992 Constitution and to make recommendations for a possible amendment to the Constitution. Oliver's illustrious services to the Commission saw him awarded for his extraordinary services as researcher to the Constitution Review Commission, unquote. Oliver is completing a doctoral program in law at the University of Cambridge. He holds previous degrees from Harvard Law School, the University of Ghana, the University Mohammed V. Sosesi, Rabat, and the University Hassan II, Casablanca, in Morocco, as well as a postgraduate qualification in constitution building in Africa from the Central European University. Oliver currently is leading a team of lawyers and human rights field investigators and researchers to investigate the gross violations of human rights, torture, and abduction of unarmed civilians in Ashaiman by the Ghana Armed Forces. Oliver Barker-Vormawor, please, let's hear you.
Thank you, Samson and Maame, for the opportunity to join this all-important conversation. I hope you can hear me. I grew up at the feet of a father who loved to tell stories. As such, despite being the youngest on this lineup, I have with much regret picked up a habit of old men, that of convoluted storytelling. And so today I want to tell you a story. It's a story I have decided to call a constitution of our making. Like every story told by an old man, there are parts of what I'm going to say where you might not even know where I'm going with this. But stay with me. I promise it will all make sense at the end. See, the truth is, I have decided that a story rather than an academic presentation will speak better to your hearts and minds. In stating my case for a new constitution, I have chosen to speak directly to you, not at you. I have not presumed that you do not appreciate what the issues are or what the arguments on all sides are. It's been 30 years of these kinds of conversations. So you know the main proposals and the old arguments presented and represented every day. So I tell you this story only to attempt one last plea on behalf of my generation, a generation that lives today on the edges of despair. May you hear us. In 1787, the roots of a new nation were planted far away across the other side of the Atlantic. With the birth of that nation, the United States of America, humans came upon a new idea. It was something they called a constitution. In giving to themselves that constitution, these new Americans broke off the shackles of colonial Britain and made for themselves a rendezvous with destiny, a rendezvous of their own choosing and a constitution of their own making. As Abraham Lincoln would later say of that constitution eloquently, 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. It has been nearly 245 years since the American Constitution was adopted. 245. But what has America got to do with Ghana? Well, 66 years ago, our founding generation gambled for themselves to a tryst with destiny. As the Union Jack of colonial Britain was being lowered and the flag of our new nation was being hoisted up, our founding fathers also made a bet with the world. They bet that soon a time will come when our people, then and tomorrow, will show the world that the black man was capable of managing his own affairs. They captured the ambition as a desire to build a republic conceived in freedom and justice. And so we made the project of ensuring for all our people freedom and justice our national creed. Yet the project they set in motion was soon disrupted in 1966 and a couple other times until 1992. 31 years ago this month, on 28th April 1991, a little of over 3 million of our people joined queues to adopt for themselves and a coming generation a new constitution. In so doing, they hoped that they too had planted firm the roots of liberty, that they had established a framework of government which was capable of securing for themselves and posterity the blessing of liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity. The document they gave birth to, PNDC Law 282, or as we prefer to call it, the 1992 Constitution, is 30 years old. Apart from the Liberian Constitution of 1986, ours is the oldest in the West African sub-region. This is no doubt something many deem worth celebrating. And it is. Yet over the past few years, you have heard many young people call for a new constitution for a new generation. Their calls for us to contend with the injustices that the 1992 constitution has created have only grown louder and gained more constituency since the idea was first championed by Face the Country, a movement I am proud to be associated with. Why? Because if anything, the 13 years we have given to the 1992 constitution tells you that this is not a rushed decision. It shows you that we have been patient with the 1992 constitution and we have given it enough opportunities to show us the path forward. Time and time, it has failed to deliver to us the blessings of prosperity and equal opportunity. Directly because of it, a select few prosper at the expense of all. Despite this, many continue to genuinely ask, if the American Constitution has survived 245 years and has been amended 27 times, why must we throw our 30 years of our tradition for a new constitution? Why can't we just amend ours too? After all, America is perhaps the greatest country in the world and we must follow its example of constitutional longevity. Those arguments seem compelling and in fact compelling to many. But when the story of the American Constitution is told, very often we tell it by glossing over its history. Many forget that in order to preserve that Constitution and its union, America had to fight a civil war. A war that left between 620,000 and 750,000 soldiers dead, along with an estimated 50,000 civilian casualties. The Civil War, a result of constitutional crisis, is still today the deadliest conflict in American history. The Liberian Constitution is the oldest in West Africa. Liberians have fought 2 civil wars to make their constitution the oldest in the region. Over 200,000 lives lost, over 1 million displaced, and a generation damaged for life over the traumas of those wars. This republic, our republic, does not have a civil war to give. It cannot survive another coup, another revolution, or even an Arab Spring as our president, then a candidate, used to warn us is very imminent. We may not have the incredible luck or fortunes of America to allow our republic to be pushed into a civil war or such an uprising. I assure you, we will not survive it. Now, we cannot be fixated over constitutional longevity to the detriment of how we build a just society together. All constitutions do not produce justice just because they are old. There is nothing more detrimental to nation building than a blind fascination with things considered old and untouchable. If not, we become like the abused wife who is still devoted to his abusive and alcoholic husband because she does not know how to live differently. In fact, in 1980, when Samuel Doe and a small number of soldiers overthrew President William Tolbert in Liberia, they were also overthrowing a constitution that had been in force since 1847. 1847. Let the Liberian example be our guiding post. All constitutions do not stop coups. Only a true democracy that guarantees for its citizens the fruits of justice and the equality of opportunity and prosperity. Here is the truth we are facing. Our constitution, PNDC Law 282, has lost the capacity to generate a framework for justice or to secure for us the blessings of equal opportunity and prosperity. Its soul and spirit have been compromised by a generation of greed and decay. For 13 years, we have, with the complicity of the 1992 Constitution, built a society that thrives on exclusion and violence. A republic where soldiers can walk into and brutalize an entire community because one of them lost his yam food. Where our military, with the blessings of our president and his appointees, descend on the community with the heavy machinery our taxes paid for, to slash and maim over 2,000 people in Ashama because one of their own had been killed by thieves. And when they are done, they go to national TV in front of an impotent president and demoralize people. Where those with access and privilege, members of the ruling class, call the military secretly to congratulate them for unleashing their terror and inhumanity on us. And yet our constitution keeps silent. Speak if you are alive. Protect us if you are not dead. When those charged with giving life to a constitution can look the other way, as so many of our people hunger and die without any sense of obligation or shame, when Ghanaians are killed at will and randomly with impunity from Ejura to Techiman, when our existence as citizens is only tolerated by a political class that has not yet found a way to enrich themselves by getting rid of us, where our cry for the freedom and justice our fathers promised us is mocked, how dare you tell me that this is a constitutional democracy? We are living in an era where the pensions of our fathers and the toil of our mothers is at risk because our government will rather borrow to enrich themselves and their cousins and pursue grandiose cathedrals of doom. Where our schools are being deprived of investment and our hospitals are running out of vaccine. Where young people have no jobs. All public sector jobs are either reserved for political party foot soldiers, depend on protocol, who you know, and payment of bribe. Yet we pretend to not notice all of this. Economic despair is on the cheeks and rib cages of all except government appointees and their family and friends. We are lost as a people, and yet we are presented with no way out of this economic abyss. They told us that the e-levy was going to be the game changer. They told us if we pass the e-levy, there will be more accountability and we will reduce waste and profligacy. We warned you. Young people whose future is at stake warned you. For in pushing opposition to that e-levy, I was arrested, tortured, and unlawfully detained for 35 days. They passed it. Then they added more ministers to their government. Complicit as always, our parliament passed that too. Today, while you slept, like a thief at night, our parliament again passed 3 new oppressive taxes. Just like the e-levy, they carried into the chambers a parliamentarian who was on his sickbed, running straight from the scene of an accident to commit another accident of history. They will continue to strip us all naked till we have nothing more to give. Many banks and businesses have been crushed to death. Today, as we knock on the door of the IMF for the 17th time, as the Vice President of America promises to send us colonial economic advisors, as the German ambassador lectures us to cut down the size of our government, and the Dutch ambassador tells us, why not Ghana beyond corruption? It is clear that we have lost the bet our fathers made to show the world that we, as the pride of Black Africa, are capable of managing our own affairs. We have lost our national pride. I assure you, this era of greed, impunity, and dispossession cannot continue forever. We must reverse course now, or we will lose this project. This experiment will fail if we do not address its inherent injustices. We cannot continue to ignore, mock, and ridicule the real pain and suffering of our people. We cannot continue to look the other way. For how long will we continue to perform democracy for foreign audiences while we live under the rule of the gun and immoral profiteering? No country forged in brutal force, underdevelopment, and economic violence has ever survived the test of destiny. This refusal to reckon with the true face of injustice in this republic will not survive forever. Now, why do I believe a new constitution is our only path forward? First, there are many people, lawyers especially, who fail to appreciate the essence of the constitution and the role it occupies in the national psyche. They see the constitution only as a legal document, and as such, they approach it with the lens of a contract or commercial lawyer. As contract lawyers, they have only one way of seeing the proposals on the table: amend. Or why not just amend something here and there, something small, so we can move on? The mistake they make is that they assume there's a constituency of people who actually believe in this constitution, and that all we need is a free textual amendment for it to work. The problem we are facing isn't one of bad or inelegant drafting. It is about restoring back faith in the project Ghana. I'm sorry, cutting and pasting here and there will not solve the problem. Secondly, there are also many who say that our constitution is perfect, and it is us Ghanaians who are bad people, and that until we fix ourselves, nothing will change. In all of my lifetime and that of those before me, I have never seen any nation built out of angels and a people without blemish. When we hear these arguments, we must pay critical attention to those who say these things. Because among that crowd are also people whose palm kernels have been cracked by the benevolence of the gluttony that this era has enabled. They have made themselves rich from the profligacy of this era of greed. Now they shape-shift as intellectual apostles whose only aim and ambition is to preserve a status quo that has dealt very well with them. They speak as apostles of an age of disbelief. It is part of a long game designed to blame you, demoralize you in order for you to accept your circumstances. They never present you with a true and concrete plan for fixing bad Ghanaians. Instead, by making you doubt the urgency of your aspiration, by invalidating your dreams and your equal claim to reimagining a better society, they succeed in preserving the status quo. Be wary of them. But hear me, there is also among that crowd of people of genuine intent, people who understand that the demands of a constitution go beyond its text, that every constitution must be propelled not only by what it says, but also by what it does not. That no society that is without strong ethical and constitutional values can succeed. Those concerns are genuine. But this is exactly what we are advocating for. Because the constitution of a nation is much more than a simple road traffic law. It carries with it the hopes and aspirations of the people. And when they have lost belief and hope, when they are no longer compelled by the moral authority of that document, the constitution has lost its raison d'etre. It will forever mean very little to the executive that swears an oath to uphold it, and to the judiciary that is called upon to interpret it, yet undermines it at every opportunity. When we call for a new constitution, we are calling for something much more than a gathering of a few lawyers, a few Article 71 office holders, and a few friends of the regime who will huddle the Kempinski conference room to produce for us another document without a soul. No. A new constitution is a process, not an event. It is an opportunity to rebuild our society's belief and desire for change from the ground up. We must knock on every door. We must engage every citizen, and we must implant in all of us a new belief for change. Unless we can ground the passion for a just society in the hearts and minds of people across this country, unless people accept with joy and desire this mandate to build from all of us a constitution of our own making, unless people understand that the new constitution of our own making is in fact an invitation to rebuild the moral compass of this nation, we will fail. No amendments to the 1992 Constitution, be it written in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Arabic, can wake up a consciousness and a sense of belief that is dead and gone. Finally, there are also those linear thinkers, lawyers especially, who have convinced themselves that a new constitution is technically impossible because the only path to reform is through sporadic amendments along the narrow confines of Chapter 25 of the Constitution. No constitution can legislate away the sovereignty of its people. Our constitution is not a suicide pact. It can be changed by the very people who created it. That is what the recognition of the sovereignty of our people means. Even narrowly, we are not the first country to contemplate constitutional change in the face of a constitution that makes no provision for its renewal. From Kenya through Barbados to Chile, these conflicts have been resolved to recognize the enduring and permanent sovereignty of a people over their own constitution. See, the truth is, when I speak of a constitution of our making, I do so knowing that what I am proposing has never been tried before. Our people have never truly made a truly free constitution before. In 1957, our constitution was given to us by the British Parliament. In 1960, instead of we the people, only the parliamentarians created that constitution. In 1969, 1979, and 1992, some selected representatives of people were made to negotiate for a new constitution under the hostage of the NLC, the AFRC, and the PNDC. We have never, as the people of Ghana, made for ourselves a constitution. Never in the time of a democracy have we as a people been called upon to join hands in reimagining and rebuilding our country. This is the time. We cannot view this call for a new constitution as some pet project where we assemble a few lawyers and friends of the Article 71 class to go and write somewhere. No, the stakes are too high. True constitution making goes beyond that. This is our opportunity to recapture the beauty, vibrancy and disruption of all of Ghana, from Boku to Mampong, from those who sit aloof to those who would much rather occupy Ghana, from the heartbroken yet earnest souls who sing Fix the Country to the bellefools who scream, fix yourselves back at us. We must speak to everyone. We must engage ourselves as one people with a shared journey, despite our different devotions to the vision of freedom. We must give our people a reason to dream again. We must renew for them a vision of a Ghana that is possible, a Ghana that is daring. Give us back the Ghana that our fathers and mothers yearned for. Give us back the pride of belief in the possibility that Ghana is the greatest country in the whole world. Let us rediscover together our shared humanity, our shared values, and willingness to yearn for freedom. Together, through a constitution of our own making. Chogoye. Thank you.
You timed yourself. Thank you very much. But is this constitution dead in its soul? What will be your brief comment, Dr. Maame Mensa-Bonsu, before we take a break and return to our next guest, Ace Anan Ankomah?
Let me start by saying, wow, Oliver. That was a very powerful speech. And many of the themes that you draw out resonate with a lot of the things that other people have said, and some of the things that I'm personally very passionate about. I'm going to draw out the lines I see between what you were saying and what Bridgette was saying, for instance, that we talk about the peaceful transfer of power and the number of elections, but not the impact of the Constitution on the lives of citizens. And that is the true measure, really, of any Constitution's achievements. And as one of those who have several times mentioned the age of the Constitution, I should point out that there are those who value that which is old for being old's sake. But when I talk about the age of the Constitution, what I am celebrating is the length of time in which we have not lived under a gun, and what that does for you as a people. I tell the story quite frequently of when I was 6 and I sat on a soldier's lap in a bus, and I was petrified. He asked me to sit, the bus was full, and as they did, then they would hop onto the bus and take somebody's seat. And this soldier let me sit on him when he took my seat. And it was a school bus, so he had no business on it in the first place. But when I sat on his lap, I was petrified. And when it was time to get off, I scrambled so hard I dropped my water bottle on his boot and spilled the water. And I tell you with absolutely no exaggeration that for a week after that, every day after school, I'd come and lie on the rug in the living room, waiting for them to come and get me. And I told myself that if I stayed close to the gate, then when they came, they wouldn't have to see my little sister and my family and harass everybody. They could just take me away and it'd be fine. It took over a week of them not coming for me to believe that I was going to live for having poured water on a soldier's boot. That is what I celebrate when I celebrate that we have had a constitution for 30 years. So on the one hand, age itself is not a blessing. But on the other, the fact that we have come far enough to stand here on this show and talk about this, not worrying that we'll be picked up after this program, that's something we ought not to let get lost in the conversation. Nevertheless, the Constitution's impact on the socioeconomic futures of the majority of the country has not been what we hoped it would be. And it is not right to forget that or overlook that. And the thing that Oliver says that I think is really important for us to keep in mind is that a constitution making is a process. And for me, the problem and the import of that is to say that we have the journey to undertake. So to call for a new constitution is not to say out with this one right now, because in the interim, something must function. If we do that, we will let the soldiers back in. Already they're creeping into what we consider a constitutional democracy. We see signs of it. I saw a story of the police and the army clashing at Makola. That is not a story that belongs in a constitutional state. So perhaps we're a state with a constitution that is not yet a constitutional state. And there's a lot to think about on how we make that journey. I think the call for perhaps piecemeal legislation amendment, the value in that call is that the journey towards having a proper constitution does not happen overnight. does not happen in 5 years. And if we're not going to get another document of so flawed, then we should not rush the process to a new constitution. So it's not that we should not get a new constitution, it's that the process of that new constitution is one that we must understand requires time and critically expertise. So populism seems to be quite opposed to expertise. And when we talk about, because of our history of populism, when we talk about grassroots participation, we invariably talk about talking to the people and asking everybody. And what is it called? The UNDPC, the NDPC, sorry, the National Development Planning Commission, put together a 40-year plan, which they said they achieved by consulting the people and including consulting secondary school groups. And no disrespect to the populace, but in every family, there's a role for parents. And so the idea that a new constitution must be entirely people-led is one with which I am not comfortable. Because if you look at the representatives who put together this constitution, they were more non-legal experts than legal experts. Not to say the legal experts must dominate, but I think that there's a place for expertise that does not come out clearly in much of the discussion, because we don't want to end up with another constitution with too many provisions, another constitution that gives with one hand and takes out with the other. And so the constitution making process must take time, must happen. We must involve people, and people must care when they say that they are Ghanaian, that it means something, and that is absolutely true.
All right.
In the meantime, while we're doing that, we must ask what is getting in our way now. The last comment I'm going to make is about the idea of the bad Ghanaian people. Oliver is right. It is the people who have built every country that we admire, and none of them is angelic. And our people fought for independence, the same Ghanaian people, a different generation. But they also tried something that had never been tried before, a black country, a black-run country. So yes, we can do it. But let us have no doubt about the fact that we are to blame for some of the things that we live with because we do not ask for more from our leaders. For instance, why do our parliamentarians have secret votes? We have elected people to go and represent us, and they have the power to not tell us how they use that power. And they have secret votes. And then we are surprised by the outcome. And we complain that we have now allowed the president to enlarge his government after we've complained about the size of his government. But we allowed our MPs to vote in secret. And when you put the public interest out in the open and the private interest in your heart, and then you're allowed to vote in a way that protects what is in your heart, what will happen is what is in your heart will win. And so our problems of false narratives about the good people of other places, but there are true issues of institutional incentives that we use to create bad peoples in our society.
All right. Well, Maame, I could listen to you on and over again without getting tired, but we have time to check here. Professor Ajman Baffour, Ajman Dua, and the others, for example, believe that Ghana's 1992 constitution was rushed. Mensa-Bonsu believes the same thing, and that things have to change because it was made because we're afraid that the dictator will not agree if we didn't give him enough power to appoint over 5,000 people into public service. We'll take a break here. When we return, Dr. Maame Abena Mensa-Bonsu will introduce our next speaker. Get ready for that. You're welcome back, and I need to remind you that you can just drop by the front office of Joy FM right here. If you are driving past, just stop and enter and ask for a copy of the Constitution. The Constitution that is 30 years old now, the one we are talking about right now. Read, understand it, and help us be able to have a good, reasoned conversation around the Constitution at a time when the calls are rife for it to be amended. Hello, Dr. Maame Mensa-Bonsu.
Happy to introduce our next guest, Mr. Ace Ankomah, a very senior lawyer of 30 years plus standing. we will, yes, sorry. I was just checking, Mr. Ankomah is here, right? So I'd like to introduce Mr. Asa Ankomah, who is a very senior lawyer, 30 years plus at the bar, and a well-known voice in Ghanaian public affairs. So thank you for joining us today, Ace. And please to go ahead and tell us what your case for constitutional review is. As Samson said, you have 15 to 20 minutes. If you could please time yourself.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for giving me the time limit. Because I talk for a living, when it's my time, just mute me. By all means, let's amend the Constitution. After 3 decades of the Constitution, it certainly is time to take another look at it. You're right, my entry into the legal profession coincided with the coming into force of this Constitution. So there's a sense in which my entire legal career has been tied down to this Constitution. So by all means, let's make the changes. With the passage of time, we have seen things that we need to look at again. We've had one amendment. It's not as if we haven't amended before. I think we've had 196, which we removed the vice president from certain committees and ensure that Parliament has a good pension to a large extent. There's also the citizenship bit along the line. But we've had those, well, maybe several amendments in 1 or 2, but it's not as if we haven't amended before. You need to then again the tide. I believe that although there's a need to look at and review the Constitution for all of our purposes, is the strong man, the bottom man. Everything that we have failed or refused or neglected to do is blamed on the Constitution. And then there's a cry, amend the Constitution. Let's do it. Some can be amended rather easily, but quite difficultly. 2/3 majority of Parliament for the non-entrenched clause. We saw one spectacularly fail a couple of years ago because we are so polarized that no party wants the other one to be the one to take the credit for a constitutional amendment. Then we have to do the non-entrenched provisions. We have to go to the people. 40% of registered voters must vote. 75% of them carry it. The last attempt also ended because there was a change of government, and the new government did not look like it was interested in putting that agenda forward. And so we will be calling for a change in the Constitution for a very long time. My thing is that what happens between now and then able to change the Constitution in whichever way possible, either by means or by the subtle or not so subtle hints of it. Now, every Constitution is on paper, and you have letters of ink. That paper and that ink cannot write, pen themselves. It's the people who are the beneficiaries, who are the enactors and beneficiaries of the Constitution, will not write that, pen the Constitution, but rather make it the written point of all our problems. And I think that is where we are. Now, how did others, everybody refers to the United States. Some refer to it and then pretend not to be referring to it. How do we set their Constitution? I think it's 3 C's. 1, they all constitutions. But these are things we agree upon. And so, although it might not be said in our Constitution, and compared to the Constitution, American Constitution is very different. But they have informed conventions that have come to stay, and they consider themselves bound by it. Because over and above the Constitution, people ought to be able to think and say, The third one is that they have used challenges. Literally, almost every part of that Constitution has been tested in court. Literally. And so, when they are not clear, where the Convention and Congress cannot step in or will not step in, have gone to court and challenged it. And through that, they have informed constitutional principles, some of which we have adopted in our Constitution. I don't think we are seeing enough of that. And so, while screaming for that the constitution should be changed, we should ask ourselves, are we even worthy of this constitution? What have we done with this? That situation where we are perfected, evading the constitution and defying it and calling ourselves man. And when we are defied, we have more provisions to defy and not follow. This constitution said in when it came to force in 1993, that Parliament must, as soon as possible, come up with a spousal right to property law, which determines property rights of spouses. It's been 30 years, nothing apart from a few droplets they put in the Land Act. Parliament has failed or refused or neglected to do it. And we want to amend the constitution to say what? We can't hold Parliament responsible for the duty that the constitution has given to it. So, and the other one, Article 1815, that Parliament must modify the loan regime which is applicable to international business and economic transactions. The Supreme Court has been begging Parliament to do it. So now that Parliament has refused to step to the plate, we have a system where we have legislation by the accident of litigation. So if somebody goes to court and raises the point, then the Supreme Court will literally make the law that Parliament is supposed to make. And we are not insisting on this. Nobody is insisting that these constitutional provisions be followed by Parliament. And we want amendments. We talk about the president being too powerful. I agree. We need to take some power, especially the power of appointments, some of it from the president. But wait a second. In 1969, under the leadership and guidance of Akufo-Addo the Elder, the one who became the ceremonial president, we decided that the previous presidency was indeed too powerful. So we made sure that we provided language that insulated the judiciary from executive influence, that the judiciary shall not be subject to the control or direction of any other person. Then we decided that having separated powers, there are certain functions that we don't want to be under executive influence. For example, the election function, the auditing function, the role of the press. And so we created constitutionally independent bodies who, although were appointed at the time by the ceremonial president, were given the same quality of independence as the judiciary, shall not be subject to the direction and control of any other person or authority. What have we seen? The president appoints, and for the longest time, is able to exert influence. I ask a question. Can the president order the Chief Justice to go on if the Chief Justice hasn't gone on? If the president cannot, then the president cannot order the EC boss or the Auditor General to go on leave. It's as simple as that. Now, if we will not fight to protect the few ring-fenced institutions from executive control, we are asking for more power to be taken, so we will allow them to be influenced as well. We must sit down and have introspection. How have we been faithful to this document that we want changed? If we have not been able to protect it, whatever we do, we will not protect it. It will just be another nicely written piece of paper, and we will expect the ink to rise up in the alphabet to defend themselves. And so I'm saying that between now and whenever we must begin to have our own change, where we are rising up as we make. If the electoral bodies and the auditing bodies and the judicial body are not complying with the law, the Constitution provides how that should be done. Let me get to the one. Gerrymandering is the delight of the EU that we like to refer to, where literally through political redistricting, the Constitution, the constituencies increasing, etc., they are able to determine the state of elections. Our Constitution looked at it and said that the executive and the legislature have no role in the creation of constituencies. That is limited to the Electoral Commission. And the Constitution gives guidelines, even time specifications on when that could happen. But what have we seen happen? The political class then sat down and
Did Ace's line break? Please, is Ace offline?
Well,
Ace's line is breaking. Hello, Ace.
Hello. I think I went offline briefly.
Yes, Ace. You were making a very significant point on what the Constitution says about the EC and why the political parties don't have a role in delimiting constitutions. And then your line broke.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I was saying that the political forces of the land are not supposed to have any influence on it. But what they did from 1993 was to sit down quietly and insert a line in the then Local Government Act and now the Local Governance Act, which says that a person cannot belong to two district assemblies at the same time. That means that an MP cannot belong to two district assemblies. So what the political forces do is that when they see that the 7-year cycle for creating constituencies is coming up, they create district assemblies, they create districts. And so that it cannot belong to two district assemblies, EC is forced to create the constituencies to follow the lead of the executive and legislature. And we sat down for this to happen for 30 years, and we want to amend the constitution instead of screaming at them to stop it. If we can't scream, what do we want? So literally check the evolution of the creation of constituency. EC will say, we follow the constitution, we follow the 7-year cycle, we follow everything. But he cannot deny, because by the Local Governance Act, whatever it's called over the period, it was Local Government Act, not Local Governance Act. We said a president cannot belong to two assemblies. The MP cannot belong to two assemblies. So they are forced to create constituencies. Clear gerrymandering, a more perfect constitution. We talk about 71 and the gravy train.
I think we're still getting a bit of a difficulty with Ace's connection. Ace's line just went off again, correct? Okay, so we have a little difficulty. Ace's connection has just been lost again, and he's making a very important point. If you have followed Ace recently, he's written about amending the Constitution we don't deserve, and he believes, as you can hear him begin to say very straightforwardly, that there's something that we ought to be doing as citizens, as participants in the process, rather than, yes, there should be some amendments, but there are things that the Constitution requires to be done that are not being done, that we must play our role and insist that they are done. So that's one of the important points he's making. Unfortunately, his line is breaking. We are trying to see if we can reconnect with him so that he would continue with his point. Our last speaker will be Kathleen Addy, who is the chairperson of the NCCE. They definitely will have some role to play once we all agree that we need a constitution, a new one, or we need to amend it, we need to educate the people. Just stop by the front office of Joy FM. Within this show, after the show, it is no more available to you to pick a copy of the Constitution. All right, so we now have Ace Ankomah on phone, hoping that it will be good to continue with him on that. Hello, Ace.
Hi, Samson.
Right.
Thanks. So I was beginning to speak about Article 71, and we are all talking about it. What a crazy train it is that people get fast money at the end of every cycle because they are deemed to have retired and come back to office. Where in the Constitution is the numbers dictated? No. The Constitution says there should be a commission that should determine the terms and conditions and emoluments of certain office holders for a specific term of for a specific period, 4 years. What has the political class done? They have deferred it although the Constitution effectively demands that it starts when a term starts, they defer it to the end of the term. So that by the time the commission is appointed and does its work, there's very little time for public debate. So it goes to the president to approve of the parliament, and it goes to parliament to approve for the executive, wrap my back. They agree on fast amounts of money, for the most part, as back pay, and then pensions. And so everybody who fits Article 71 place, once the back pay is calculated, makes the back pay. And we, as the people, can't insist that a president who comes to power must immediately set up the committee, for the committee to give the figures, for there to be enough time for the people of Ghana to be able to debate it, and not at the midnight of power. And we can't do something as simple as this. We can't tell this president that set up the committee now to determine now what your emoluments are, instead of, quote unquote, stopping what was prepared for your predecessors, in the hope that when the committee is set up in the next couple of years, times would have changed. It will recommend increases in your salary. That new increased salary will be used to calculate your back pay and your pension, so you go away and join the gravy train. And we can't do this. And we think that simply amending the Constitution will resolve this. Let me move on to the number of Supreme Court judges. I hear it all the time. And I agree. Maybe the framers should have provided a cap. But maybe they expected us to be sensible and reasonable. That we want to give you a cap because things might change. And we don't want you to be stuck in a situation where you have to amend the Constitution every time that the situation on the Supreme Court changes. And look, we give the U.S. as an example, 9 judges. But the U.S., through their in limine proceedings, determine how many cases the Supreme Court is going to hear anyway. The vast majority of cases don't get heard. And Supreme Court does not have that benefit. In all of its jurisdictions, original, appellate, special, there are about 6 of them. In all of them, the Supreme Court must sit and hear the matter. Who has done the math? What's the volume of work? How many pages are these people reading? How many judgments are they producing? What is the work in progress time from filing to decision? How long does it take? Why is it taking 3 years for a simple constitutional challenge to be heard? Is it because we think the judges are simply lazy? Is it because we don't have enough judges? Or is it because they are swamped with work? Nobody is doing the heavy lifting. We just want to make the noise. Provide a cap. So the cap might be too wide or might be too small. But we need to roll our sleeves up and ask, why is this going on and what can we do? Well, why not? Let's amend the Constitution and provide a cap. Because we think that amending the Constitution is a simple answer to all our problems and a simple refusal to think, roll up our sleeves and do the heavy lifting. Let me end with this. We want to amend the Constitution. Let's get ready. And I believe in constitutional amendments of Constitution. And the thinly veiled threat of some other change, well, let us cross or blow that bridge if we ever get there. But between now and then, I think that we need to form our own CDC. The CDC, which is either Committee for the Defense of the Constitution or Constitution Defense Committee, where a number of people in this country will say, let us defend this document that we have put down from this executive tricks and judicial tricks, where they do everything in their power to breach the Constitution. If they make any wrong move, we are either making noise in their ears or we are taking them to court for there to be judicial determination on this issue. Whether we win or not is another thing. And so, listen, the Constitution everybody refers to, they maintain it through conventions, through their Congress, and through their courts. Ghana, can we evolve conventions? Can Parliament step up and do what the Constitution has instructed the Parliament to do, instead of simply not doing it and then asking for change? The worst is when I heard the majority and minority leader telling me that the Constitution has to change. After I asked my question, that whole session ended. Congress must step up to our Congress, Parliament must step up to it, and then the challenge is something you and me being prepared to take the government on. Look, and I'll refer to this. Is it not the Constitution that said that the Auditor General must disallow and take tax? Why is it that for almost 30 years they didn't do it?
Yes.
And everybody just sat down. Somebody has to go to court, spend money, go to court, before the court will order the Auditor General to do what the Constitution says he should do. And you can see that now that the Auditor General is doing it, Parliament is very uncomfortable. The Executive is very uncomfortable. Parliament is trying to control the Auditor General. The Executive is trying to control the Auditor General. The last attempt by the Attorney General, it took civil society to rise up to tell the Attorney General that you can't give instructions to the Auditor General. That was a good step. We need more people to form themselves into a committee for the defense of the Constitution. And if we have defended the Constitution and it still hasn't worked, then we can make a stronger case for amending it. But right now, we simply blame the paper when we are the ones at fault.
Okay.
I'm saying that maybe we do not deserve the Constitution. And maybe the first amendment we need is the amendment of the Ghanaian and not probably the paper. If we can't work with this Constitution, trust me, a Constitution written in heaven, on tablets with gold, won't work in Ghana because we will find ways of breaching it. That is what we do. It's our specialty. And so let's amend ourselves first, and then let's amend the paper. Thank you.
The first amendment, the most important, is to amend the Ghanaian, amend our mind, amend our ways, form, a cadre of defenders of the Constitution. Very, very significant points there made. I think we can have Maame, give us some 2 minutes commentary, and then I'll bring on our final guest. Maame, unmute.
Sorry. Thank you, Samson. Thank you, Ace. I think that is what I like the verbs of his speech. I'm always asking for verbs. When people say we have to do something different, we have to do something different. Well, how do we do something different? So I'm going to commend Ace on giving us very clear verbs of the things we can do differently. And he picks up on the thing that I was talking about institutionally creating bad people. And he's very right that Parliament actually carries a lot of the blame for the things that don't work well in our Constitution. Because no Constitution can provide for everything. And if it did, it would create a robotic people if it was successful in doing so. At some point, there's a meeting between text and people, their choices, their discretion, the things that they prioritize. Yes, the ordinary rural Ghanaian may not be in a position to hold their parliamentarian accountable, and that is a problem that's one of the problems that Oliver identifies with our Constitution, that and as Bridgette was saying, the impact on human lives. But there is a class of Ghanaians who could and should and don't. So when Ace talks about how it took civil society rising up to tell the Attorney General, he's right. Civil society did that. But civil society ought to do that. That is civil society's role. There's nothing particularly impressive about civil society having to do that, because democracy is a three-way pact between the state, its agents, and the people whose power they are exercising. So yes, Parliament is to blame for a lot of our problems, for the practices that don't allow for accountability, for not ensuring things that they've been empowered to do are done. I was complaining about the secret ballot. This is a parliamentary rule. It's nowhere in our Constitution that our parliamentarians should vote secretly. The majority whip and the minority whip and the heckling that happens in Parliament as concerted efforts, this is nowhere in our Constitution. That parliamentarians should all say no about something, whether they agree with it or not. It's nowhere in our Constitution. These are choices that we are creating institutional practice to entrench. And so, as Ace says, a lot of our problems can be solved by our political class actually bothering to do what the political class of the 1950s did.
Yep.
The J.B. Dankwas and the Nkrumahs were willing to be in prison over principles, right? And our parliamentarians vote for things they don't believe in. So to that extent, he is right. What could a constitutional change do for that?
All right.
Right. There also are proper things that need to be changed. And I'd like to very finally comment on the cap on the Supreme Court. Ace is completely right. There must be a cap. There must be a cap. Why must there be a cap? Right. The better question is, what does our Supreme Court do? What are the jurisdictions assigned to the Supreme Court? Do we need more judges or fewer jurisdictions? it is cheaper to have fewer jurisdictions in the Supreme Court than to have more Supreme Court judges.
All right.
So given our economic challenges, perhaps we should consider that. And then in having to do so, we should have an intelligent and informed conversation about the jurisdictions that the Supreme Court exercise, which ones they must exercise.
Right.
Why must an injunction in a family matter at the district court go all the way to Supreme Court on appeal? So these kinds of things we need to work out.
All right.
Rather than kind of, get on trains about things like a cap. We can't contain all human action.
Thank you very much. And the Newsfile is brought to you by the candid sponsorship of Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 years. My Way Insurance. Dial star 165 hash on MTN to join. Duraplus, where Duraplus go, water flows. DBS Industries, Roofing, Papa Fie, and Rehoboth Social Housing. Your housing dreams become reality. Now let's bring our very final guest. Unfortunately, we're going to hold our last guest to 10 minutes of presentation. And our final guest is Kathleen Addy. She's chairperson of the National Commission for Civic Education, NCCE, and former deputy chair of the commission in charge of finance and administration. She was previously with the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD, where she worked as the Afrobarometer Communications Coordinator with oversight responsibilities for 7 countries across East and West Africa. Prior to Afrobarometer, Ms. Addy was with the Center for Policy Analysis, a leading think tank that provided advisory services for the government of Ghana, among others. As a research and communications officer at CEPA, her focus was on economic partnership agreement between Ghana and the European Union, as well as women's economic empowerment. She has also consulted on a wide range of issues for different development partners, including Star Ghana, GIZ, and ILO. Ms. Addy is highly regarded as a civic activist with particular interest in women's empowerment, as well as accountable and responsive governance, and has supported different civil society groups fighting for good governance and women's rights in Ghana. Thank you so very much. And you have said that if we want to amend the Constitution, we should amend it in a manner that cures the ills of society. Let's hear you. Please unmute your mic.
Can you hear me, please?
Can hear you now, please. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Samson, and thank you for this opportunity to participate in yet another program focused on constitutional review, constitutional reforms, constitutional amendments in Ghana. I would also like to situate my presentation in the context of the introduction to the 1992 Constitution, and also parts of Chapter 6, which is the directive principles of state policy. And so the preamble reads, and I don't want to go over it because apparently I have less time than everyone else, which is unfair, therefore unconstitutional. Samson, I stated to the media on 7th of January this year, when we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the promulgation of the Constitution. 30 years of constitutional democracy marks a true watershed milestone in the history of our democracy. None of our previous democratic constitutions lasted anywhere near this long. Both the 1969 and 1979 constitutions lasted approximately 2.5 years, and the 1957 independent constitution only lasted longer than 3 years. So this is a defining moment in our political history as a country, and we should be quite rightly proud of how far we've come. Our achievements are monumental, and Ghana's reputation all over Africa as a beacon for democracy is very well deserved. We've held 8 democratic elections. And Ghana's reputation all over Africa as a beacon for democracy is very well deserved. We've held 8 democratic elections. Elections have been keenly fought, but the outcomes never preordained. And even though they are intensely fought, the winner is always magnanimous. The opposition always accept the outcome or uses constitutional means to challenge the outcome, generally speaking. Let me also highlight that our economic performance over the last 30 years under democratic rule is superior to the 30 years prior to democratic rule. So this is just to set the backdrop for what I'm about to say. And to say now that, you know, in spite of all of that, all these good things that we have achieved as a constitutional democracy under this fourth Republican Constitution, it is indisputable that we live in a time of restlessness, discontent, with a unanimous clamor for constitutional amendment that will ostensibly solve all our problems. By the way, the title of my presentation is, by all means, let's amend the Constitution if we must. However, let's also make sure that the amendment actually cures the ills we want to eradicate as a society. We are all keenly aware of the many problems plaguing us, and we are also aware that many of those problems will not be resolved by constitutional amendment. We have a plethora of laws in this country that we flout with impunity. Ace has just talked about some of them. At every level, at the political level, at every level, ordinary people, we flout laws with impunity. What is to say that a new constitution will be something different? I think that Oliver intimated that if the constitution if we have a new constitution that involves everybody, then people will obey the rules or will go by the laws. But going by the track record, that is not the case. The constitution, as we have it, this also already been stated, was a really grassroots affair. The putting it together was a grassroots affair. So it is also not automatic that just because a lot of people's voices come together in putting together a constitution means that that constitution will work. So, I mean, I just want to talk about a couple of things. This may sound very mundane, but these are the kinds of things that, you know, we need to resolve, or we need to look at, we need to address as citizens of a country. And these things which plague our society, we have to ask ourselves, is it constitutional reforms that will solve these problems? So basically, there are very basic things we can do, and then there are important things we can do, such as constitutional reforms. The basic things, are we doing them? So for instance, which constitutional reforms, new laws are needed to ensure that people who are already paid to deliver government services do not extort arbitrary fees before providing those services to citizens? Do we need constitutional reforms before, for instance, we sanitize our airwaves? Currently, we don't vet anything that we show that is aired on TV or radio. We have fed a whole generation of young people a steady diet of movies and telenovelas. We promote immoral and unethical content, undesirable values. We see the results, because what you feed the brain, you will reap. Is what you put in is what you get out. So we have citizens who, you know, may not necessarily have the right values, but this is what we have done. And it's not because of the Constitution, it's because the Constitution, as we have it, has not been implemented properly. We sit in this place where, you know, I heard of a case where a sick person was pushed out of public transport and abandoned by the roadside in a community where she or he knew no one, and did not get help and died. So what kind of values do we have as a society that has brought us to this point where we are sitting in a bus and somebody is dying, and we just push the person onto the roadside and drive on? And the people in that community look at him and also just look at him, and he's there and he doesn't get any help and he dies right there. This does not require constitutional reform, but these things are important if we are supposed to evolve as a society, build a developed or oriented country. We need to have some values. Which constitutional reforms will erase the culture of insult, abuse, online bullying that is now an integral part of debate and disagreement? Which constitutional reforms will truly fill our hearts with true humility and make us cherish fearless honesty as prescribed in our national anthem? I say these things because we could set ourselves up for great disappointment if we proceed as if constitutional reforms will resolve all the pertinent challenges we face as a people. And I'm happy to be the last speaker because I don't have to go over all the detailed, particular reforms that are needed. But I just want us to have a broad view, look at the background, look at what has happened before, and look at where we are, the path that we are trying to chart, and ask ourselves if the way we are today, the values that we hold dear, the things that we do, the way we live our lives, will a new constitution make a difference in all of that? As we work towards these reforms, we must not lose sight of failed attempts to achieve the same objectives in the past. And particularly, I take us back to 2010, when President Jonathan Mills set up a Constitutional Review Commission that undertook a comprehensive review of the Constitution and produced a report that outlined an extensive list of proposed amendments. I mean, if we have to, if there was no more grassroots process used for that reforms. I know because NCC was part of that whole exercise, putting together town hall meetings, ensuring that all the voices of the people, were heard, and all the hopes and aspirations of the people were fed into for the proposals. What happened after that? Nothing. White paper produced. The exercise came to a screeching halt. We went back to our daily grind, as it were. Nothing more was done or heard of for the next 10 years plus. A whole decade went by, nothing happened. Then in 2020, President Akufo-Addo initiated a process for limited but extremely important amendment that would have partially cured the much loathed concentration of power in the presidency by reducing the number of appointees, appointments that the president gets to make, because at least 261 MMPs would have been elected instead of appointed as things stand. And nothing came of that. Nothing came of that as well. We went all the way to the end, and we could not reach a consensus as a people, as political parties, and the whole thing came to a screeching halt. It crashed. So what is to say that going forward, this new drive for constitutional amendments will work? Bear in mind that the proposal for amendments that, for reform of local government, that has mass appeal. Everybody agrees with that. The political parties agree. And this, as all the previous speakers have said, this is one of the reforms that we all know is actually very much needed at this point. But even when the moment came for us to go through with that, we didn't do anything. We couldn't do it. And I'm saying all these things because we need to chart a roadmap for actually getting it done. I started by saying that I'm happy to be participating in yet another program to talk about constitutional reforms. And I say that because there have been many, many, many programs. In the last couple of years, there's a growing clamor, there's a call rising to a crescendo. And as for the talking, we are very good at. And outlining the ills, we are good at. And saying what needs to be done, we are good at. And painting a rosy picture of the future that we all aspire to, we are very good at doing all those things. Where is the roadmap? How are we going to go about it? What are we going to do? I think that that's where we are now. We don't need to talk about this anymore. We just need to get on with it. That's what we want. Oh no, let me just finish, Samson, please, just a few minutes. Nevertheless, I want to point out that Ghanaians actually hold a very positive view of our democracy, as many surveys have indicated. I also want to read out, and I'm saying this because as the Commission for Civic Education, we don't have a strong position. It's not our role to have a strong position on amendments in the sense of what gets to be amended, what gets to be thrown out, what gets to be put in. It's not really our role. Our interest is in ensuring that the voices and hopes and aspirations of ordinary Ghanaians are reflected in any reforms. I've also said that if there's going to be a constitutional reform process of any sort, it must be multi-stakeholder and a multi-partisan in the approach in terms of the voices, because we all know that if we don't get those dynamics right, if we don't get at least the two leading parties plus all the other political parties involved, we will go and move and continue to build up, but nothing will happen. So as a commission, we say that reform the constitution if you must, but we don't want this to be another process that gets hijacked by the elite, another process that gets hijacked by interests that are there to push a particular agenda, but it's a process that is a true reflection of the voices of people, of the hopes of people. It is true that somebody sitting in some community somewhere may not understand the process, but it is not true that that person does not have hopes and aspirations as a Ghanaian that must be enabled by a constitution that is set up in a particular way. So to that extent, it is important that we have all the voices, that the process is not hijacked, that there are no political shenanigans to tank the process and to drive us all to a point only for it to be scuttled.
All right.
I don't think we need to go through that again.
Okay.
So I must say, no, that's two more things. Just one, maybe one more.
I'm sorry, but the system will automatically cut us off in the next 3 minutes. If you can do just a minute.
Okay, but I must point out that if we are going to do reform, there are two that at least I find that cut across, everybody agrees on. One is changes to Article 243 and the other articles that are around the elections of MNDC. And then Article 78 on the appointment of ministers from Parliament. I think these two, there's general consensus that if we don't do anything at all, these two we must do something about.
All right. Thank you very much. Kathleen Addy is the chairperson of the NCCE. And as we have just discovered, somehow time ran out on us. What we intend to do, and we understand as your feedback is coming in droves, is that we will find a way of synthesizing the views that they have expressed and create a room where some of these speakers will come together, sit and now take questions. Some of you are excited to have Dr. Maame Mensa-Bonsu deal with some of these questions with them. So thank you very much, Inusah Fuseini, former chairman, Legal and Constitutional Committee of Parliament, Bridgette Dzogbenuku, former presidential candidate, the PPP, Professor Baffour, CEO of the Baffour Foundation, Oliver Barker-Vormawor, lawyer and researcher for the Constitution Review Commission, is an Ankomah lawyer and good governance advocate. He doesn't want you to add that, but we will add it. Kathleen Addy, chairperson of the NCCE. And I can't say thank you enough once again to Dr. Maame A.S. Mensa-Bonsu. I think we have a second that you can give us a closing in some 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank all of the contributors. The thoughts are important. I would like to end this by reminding us that we need to keep talking. That's the one part I disagree with Ms. Addy on. We need to keep talking. A constitution-making journey, as Oliver pointed out, is a process, and the process must be informed, and that information is achieved by constant thinking and speaking and talking. Let us not rush to another constitution. Let us talk it through and think it through. And so the more of these programs there are, the better. Thank you for dedicating your time and your thoughts to this process. Right. And hopefully more of it will happen in the future.
Thank you very much. Even though the Constitution of Ghana allows the MPs to vote secretly, we think that what is best and good practice is what you have advocated. Many people are commenting about that, and they can't understand why our MPs are voting secretly. So is it the standing orders? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. We'll be right. Thank you very much once again, and to my production for this edition of the Joy Change Speakers Series. I'm Samson Lardy Anyenini.